You know that feeling. Like you're behind on your own life, like everyone else has it figured out, and you're still just trying to keep up. Some nights it feels like there's no way to ever really rest, because there's always one more thing waiting for you. A man named Odysseus felt that too. 3,000 years ago, a goddess offered him a life with no more problems, ever again. And he said no, not because rest scared him, because he had learned something we keep forgetting. Real rest only means something once you've stopped running from your life, not out of it. So tonight, just for a little while, put the phone down. Let your shoulders drop. You don't have to solve anything right now. Just lie back and let an old man's slow walk home carry you somewhere quiet, and let yourself finally, gently fall asleep. This is Odysseus as a philosopher. Get comfortable. Let your eyes close whenever they're ready, and let this be your sleepy philosophy for the night. Enjoy your night and sleep well. Section 1. The Paradox of the Hero. He's crying on a beach again. 7 years now on an island, so beautiful it barely seems fair. And the goddess who owns it, Calypso, has told him he can stay forever. No aging, no sickness, no death. She'll give him a body that never fails and a life that never ends. And all he has to do is want it. He doesn't want it. He wants a splintery little raft, a sea that has already tried to kill him a dozen times, a wife who's gotten older without him, and a death waiting somewhere down the road like everyone else's. So he builds the raft. He sails into a storm that Poseidon personally sends to drown him. He chooses, with his eyes open, a short mortal life over an endless one. And I don't think there's a stranger decision in all of ancient literature. It's tempting to read this as a love story, a man homesick for his wife. It is that. It's also something colder and more interesting. An argument made in the shape of a man refusing a gift, that meaning and mortality are the same thing wearing two names. Take away the ending, and you take away the point. Odysseus is betting that a life which stops means something, and a life which doesn't. Nobody frames the Odyssey this way. Ask someone what the poem's about, and you get the Cyclops, the Sirens, the wooden horse, the 10-year detour. Fair enough, that's the poem's surface, and it's a great surface. But there's a second poem running underneath it, quieter, stranger, and a lot more interested in what it means to be a person than in what it means to fight one. Odysseus isn't just surviving monsters out there. He's working through a set of questions nobody in his world had a name for yet. We tend to picture Greek philosophy as men in robes in the Athenian agora, picking apart logic and the nature of the good. Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, all of it. Centuries after this poem existed, before any of them showed up, the Greek world was already circling these same questions, just doing it through story instead of argument. The Homeric epics weren't only entertainment, they were closer to the culture's shared operating system, the place people went to figure out how to think about themselves, their gods, and their odds. And the man at the center of it doesn't look like anyone else from his period. Achilles, the Iliad's hero, is almost pure nerve-ending. Rage, honor, a need for glory that will outlive him. His worth gets measured in bodies and in his own willingness to die young for a good line in a song. Odysseus is a completely different kind of animal. He wins by outthinking people, not outmuscling them. He's slippery, adaptable, hard to pin down and hard to kill. And he is, in a way, that gets uncomfortable the closer you look, always watching himself think. Here's the part that makes him hard to love cleanly, though the same qualities that keep him alive also make him kind of a nightmare to trust. He lies to nearly everyone he meets. He manipulates people who are trying to help him. He is, when it suits him, genuinely cruel. He spends most of the poem wearing some kind of mask, hiding his name from strangers, and sometimes from his own family. So which is it? Is he a hero or a con artist who's been running the same long grift since Troy? A philosopher of what it means to be human, or just a man who'll say whatever keeps him breathing? To take him seriously, you have to put down the cleaned-up version everyone grew up with, the one where he's basically a clever adventurer with a soft spot for his wife. The actual text is rougher and weirder than that. It means sitting with the specific Greek ideas underneath his choices, the ethical traps he keeps walking into on purpose, and the long line of philosophers, Hegel among them, all the way to Camus, who looked at this one wandering man and saw something worth building an entire theory of consciousness around. Because that's ultimately what this is. Not a travel story, an argument about what it means to be a person inside a universe that mostly isn't paying attention to whether you suffer. It's about truth and the stories we tell to survive it, about how much of a life is actually ours to steer, about the sheer weight of being aware at all, and having to carry that awareness through every single day of a war, a shipwreck, a slow walk home. Odysseus reads like the first modern mind in Western writing, not because his world looks like ours, but because his head does. He thinks about his own thinking, argues with gods, and ends up defined less by what he can lift than by what he can endure and understand. So let's actually start at the beginning. Not Troy, not the Cyclops, not yet. The thing underneath all of it, the one kind of intelligence that makes Odysseus different from every other mortal and most of the gods in the entire poem. Let's talk about Metis. Section 2. Metis, or the philosophy of cunning intelligence. There's a Greek word that just doesn't survive translation. Metis. We usually hand it over as cunning or craft or guile. And every one of those sounds a little bit like an insult, a little bit sneaky, when the Greeks meant something with real weight behind it. Metis isn't a good lie or a clever trap on its own. It's a whole way of being smart, the specific intelligence of something trying to stay alive, reading a world that keeps shifting under you, seeing the next move before it lands, and bending instead of breaking. The Homeric world runs on friction between two kinds of power, bi and metis. Bi is force, plain and simple, the domain of Achilles. Achilles meets a problem. He puts a spear through it. That works right up until it doesn't, because bi only wins against something weaker than you are. Sooner or later you meet the thing you can't outmuscle. Metis is the other option, the underdog's intelligence, the fox's mind, not the lion's. The scholars Marcel Detienne and Jean-Pierre Vernon, who wrote the book everyone still cites on this, describe it as something closer to instinct than logic, a feel for the hidden forces running underneath any given situation, knowing exactly where a log wants to split, knowing which way the wind is about to turn before it turns, a mix of foresight, flexibility, deception, and timing all working at once. Odysseus is the best there is at it, so good that Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, picks him as her favorite for exactly this reason. His mind runs on the same wiring as hers. When he finally sets foot back on Ithaca, she tells him something that's easy to read past, but is actually enormous. They're alike, she says, both clever in the same specific way. He's the best of mortals at counsel and storytelling. She's the one who shines among the gods for it. Read that again. A goddess of wisdom is putting her own divine intellect in the same category as a mortal man's gift for scheming. Not abstract knowledge, cunning, plain and simple, praised as the highest thing either of them has. But Metis is bigger than a survival trick. It's a way of seeing the whole universe. It assumes reality doesn't hold still, that there's no fixed rulebook underneath any of it, only currents and pressure that keep changing shape. Walk into that kind of world with rigid principles, or a policy of pure honesty, or nothing but brute strength, and it will eventually grind you down. The world's a maze. Metis is the only thread that gets you through it, which brings us to the cave. Polyphemus is by with a face, massive, essentially unkillable by anything Odysseus's men are carrying, and running purely on appetite. He doesn't care about the sacred rules of hospitality. He doesn't care about the gods. He is, in every sense, unreasonable. And once the men are sealed inside that cave with him, a straight fight is a dead end twice over, because even killing him leaves them trapped behind a boulder. None of them can move. So Odysseus doesn't fight him. He runs a con in layers. He feeds the giant unwatered wine, strong enough to work on a creature with zero tolerance for restraint. When Polyphemus, drunk and half-charmed, asks his name, Odysseus hands him a fake one, Autis. Nobody. It sounds like a throwaway joke, and it isn't. It's a loaded gun he won't fire until later. He blinds the giant with a heated stake while he sleeps it off. But the actual masterstroke is the exit. He ties his men underneath the bellies of Polyphemus's own sheep, so that when the blind giant runs his hands along their backs on the way out of the cave checking for stowaways, he feels nothing but wool. Every piece of that sequence is Metis firing on all cylinders, reading an opponent's exact psychology, using his own body against him, weaponizing a single word, bending the physical world itself around a problem that brute force could never touch. Mind beats muscle, strategy beats strength. That's the whole argument, played out in one cave. And then he ruins it, because Metis has a genuine dark side, and the poem doesn't look away from it. Deception takes a certain moral looseness to pull off, and it turns out Cunning is no match for a man's own ego. Clear of the island, safely at sea, Odysseus can't help himself. He shouts his real name back at the shore he just escaped. That's not a triumph. It's Metis failing at the exact moment it should have stayed quiet. Since real cunning means staying hidden and letting your enemy believe he already won. His pride, his hunger for Cleos, for the glory of being known as the one who did this, overrides every bit of the strategy that kept him alive, and it costs him everything. Polyphemus prays to his father Poseidon by name, and Odysseus buys himself years of open water and a boat full of dead friends. That tension is the whole story of what Odysseus represents. Metis is the sharpest tool available for surviving chaos, and it is never, not once, safe from the man wielding it. The mind can outsmart a monster. It cannot always outsmart itself. There's a real shift in what counts as heroic, buried in all this too. In the Iliad, a hero proves himself through his aristeia, his physical excellence, his willingness to stand on a battlefield and meet death without blinking. That's a tragic hero almost by design, built to die young in exchange for a song that outlives him. The Odyssey's hero wants none of that. He wants to live, and he'll lie, hide, and bargain his way there. That's a genuine reordering of what human excellence even means, out of the body and into the mind. And the poem seems to be arguing, quietly but consistently, that the highest human faculty was never the ability to destroy something. It's the ability to think your way past it. If there's a lesson Odysseus keeps handing us, it's that real intelligence was never just information sitting in your head. It's knowing how to act on it, how to read what someone else actually wants underneath what they say, how to change your plan mid-sentence when the ground shifts. It's a pragmatic, unglamorous kind of philosophy, one that cares about outcomes over rulebooks. In an unfair world, Metis is the survivor's whole argument. Sometimes staying alive means refusing to play by the rules you were handed and using whatever's in reach to protect what you love. Section 3. The Epistemology of Deception. If Metis is how Odysseus handles the physical world, lying is how he handles everybody in it. And here's the part of the poem that still makes people squirm a little, its actual attitude toward truth. Odysseus isn't just dishonest. He is, without much competition, the best liar in the entire Homeric universe. He clearly enjoys the work, and the gods, rather than punishing him for it, seem to find it charming. Take the moment he finally lands back on Ithaca. He doesn't even recognize it, because Athena has wrapped the whole island in a protective fog. He assumes he's been dumped on some random foreign coastline, and he's furious about it, pounding the ground, cursing a run of bad luck that's about to end. Athena shows up disguised as a young shepherd and asks him, casually, who he is. He doesn't tell her. He tells her a story instead, an elaborate one, fully detailed, entirely invented. A Cretan prince, ruined by hard times, shipwrecked on the way home from Troy, washed up here by pure accident. He even cries while he's telling it. He sells the lie completely, tears and all, to a total stranger on a beach where he thinks he's stranded. And Athena just smiles. She reaches out, strokes his cheek, and drops the disguise. Then she says something that ought to unsettle anyone who thinks honesty is simply, always, the right policy. That he's a shameless, thieving type, a master of lies who can't even stop telling them in his own homeland. And then, almost as an aside, the real point. That the two of them are alike, both clever in their own particular ways. She's the best of the gods at counsel and storytelling. He's the best of men. Sit with that for a second. The goddess of wisdom is complimenting a man on his lying. In the Odyssey's moral universe, truth and falsehood were never fixed categories of good and bad sitting on opposite shelves. They're tools, nothing more sacred than a knife or a rope. A lie isn't wrong just for being a lie. It's only a failure if it doesn't do the job it was built for. A well-constructed one, the kind that protects you, tests the people around you, or ruins your enemies, gets treated in this poem less like a sin and more like a piece of genuinely admirable craftsmanship. This raises a real problem. If the greatest hero in the Greek imagination is a habitual liar, and the gods approve, what does that say about how the Homeric world thinks about truth at all? The Odyssey is genuinely skeptical that objective truth is even reachable. It's full of stories inside stories. characters constantly narrating the past, the gods, their own identities, some true, some false, most somewhere in between. Homer sets this up from the start. The Muses, goddesses of memory, are supposedly the source of the poet's knowledge. But the poet is also performing for an audience, shaping the story to please them. Is the Odyssey a true history or a beautiful fiction? The poem never really answers that, and I don't think it wants to. Odysseus's lies aren't random. They're strategic. He's usually testing whoever he's talking to, probing for information, checking loyalty, sizing up character. Back on Ithaca, he tells slightly different versions of his fake Cretan backstory to Eumaeus, to Athena, and later to Penelope, tailoring each one to his audience. That's a genuinely sharp piece of psychological insight. People don't just hear what you say, they hear what they expect to hear, what fits their own picture of the world. By adjusting his lies, Odysseus is working the subjective reality of each listener. This makes him something like a proto-sophist. The sophists, a few centuries later, argued that objective truth either doesn't exist or is unreachable, and that rhetoric, the skill of persuading people through language, is the most useful thing a person can have. Odysseus is doing exactly that, long before anyone formalized it. He treats language as a tool for shaping reality, not describing it. But the poem also shows the cost of this. If truth is just a tool and everyone's lying constantly, how does anything hold together? That's the actual crisis in Ithaca. The suitors have taken over the house, eating through Odysseus's wealth, courting his wife, ignoring every law of hospitality. Order has fully broken down. Odysseus responds with deception on a large scale. He disguises himself as an old beggar. He lets the suitors mock him, throw things at him, insult him, while he quietly gathers information and plans. He builds a false world inside his own house, one where he's powerless, purely to set up his revenge. Then he drops the disguise and kills every one of them. It's brutal. But by the logic the poem sets up, it's also the restoration of order. The lies were the only path back to the truth of who actually rules Ithaca. That raises an uncomfortable question the poem doesn't fully resolve. Do the ends justify the means? If restoring order is the goal, is mass deception and mass violence an acceptable price? The Odyssey doesn't flinch from the gore of the slaughter, even while presenting it as necessary. It leaves the reader sitting with the ugly side of pragmatic ethics. Treat truth as a tool and people as objects to be managed, and you risk losing something of yourself along the way. And yet, despite all the lying, Odysseus is also capable of something like total emotional honesty. When he finally reveals himself to Penelope, there's no trick left, no false story, no disguise. It's just the two of them. The poem seems to suggest that deception is a necessary survival tool in a hostile world. But the point of all that survival is to eventually reach a place where you don't need it anymore. Odysseus uses lies to get through the sea and the wilderness. He uses truth to build a life at home. Section 4. The Philosophy of Nobody. To truly grasp the philosophical depth of Odysseus, we have to look at the moment he strips away his identity entirely. We have to look at the moment he becomes nobody. The encounter with the Cyclops Polyphemus is the most famous episode in the Odyssey, usually remembered for the monster eating the sailors and the clever trick with the sheep. But if we look at it through a philosophical lens, It is a profound exploration of identity, negation, and the existential void. When Polyphemus traps Odysseus and his men in the cave, he asks for the stranger's name. It is a basic question of social interaction. In the ancient Greek world, knowing someone's name was crucial. A name was not just a label, it was the essence of a person's identity, their lineage, their social status, and their destiny. To give your name was to establish a relationship, whether of hospitality or of enmity. When a hero faced a monster, he would typically shout his name and his lineage, claiming his glory, his kleos, before the final blow. Odysseus does the exact opposite. He looks at the giant cannibalistic monster and he says, "My name is Autis." Nobody. This is a staggering philosophical move. By naming himself nobody, Odysseus is voluntarily stepping outside the social and heroic order. He is negating his own identity. He is saying, "I am not a hero. I am not a king. I am not a son of Laertes. I am a void. I am nothing." In the context of the immediate plot, this is a brilliant tactical maneuver. When the other Cyclops hear Polyphemus screaming that "nobody is killing me," they assume he is alone and that he must be suffering from a divine affliction, so they ignore him. The linguistic trick saves their lives, but philosophically, the concept of autis is incredibly rich. It touches on the idea of negation, a concept that would not be fully explored in Western philosophy until the development of existentialism and phenomenology in the 19th and 20th centuries. To be nobody is to be free from the burdens of identity. It is to be free from the expectations of society, the demands of honor, and the weight of the past. When Odysseus is nobody, he is pure potential. He is unbound by his history. Think about the psychological state of Odysseus at this point in the journey. He is far from home. His men are dying. He is completely at the mercy of the gods and the monsters. The traditional heroic identity, the identity of the glorious warrior, is useless here. In fact, it is a liability. If he acts like Achilles, he will be eaten. To survive, he must cease to be the hero. He must become the void. This resonates deeply with later philosophical ideas about the self. The philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote extensively about the concept of despair and the loss of the self. He argued that to truly find oneself, one must first pass through a state of despair, a state of negating the finite social self to reach the infinite, authentic self. Odysseus's descent into the identity of nobody is a necessary step in his journey. He must lose his social identity, his pride, and his heroic ego before he can be reborn as the man who is capable of returning to Ithaca. Furthermore, the episode with the Cyclops is a clash between two fundamentally different ways of being in the world. Polyphemus represents a pre-social, pre-linguistic state of nature. He lives in caves. He does not farm. He does not have assemblies. He does not care about the gods or the laws of hospitality. He is pure, unreflective existence. He is a creature of the body, driven entirely by his immediate appetites. Odysseus, by becoming nobody, represents the triumph of consciousness over pure existence. He uses language, logic, and foresight to defeat a creature that operates entirely on instinct. But the victory comes at a cost. When Odysseus sails away, his ego reasserts itself. He cannot bear the thought of the monster, not knowing who defeated him. He shouts his true name back to the shore. He says, "Cyclops, if anyone asks who blinded you, say it was Odysseus, the sacker of cities, the son of Laertes, who lives in Ithaca. This is a catastrophic failure. It is the moment the philosophical experiment breaks down. Polyphemus now has a name to pray to his father Poseidon. He curses Odysseus by name, ensuring that even if he survives, he will return home late, in misery, and having lost all his companions. Why does Odysseus do this? Why does he ruin his own perfect plan? Because the identity of nobody is ultimately unsustainable for a human being. Humans are social creatures. We are defined by our relationships, our histories, and our names. To be nobody is to be free, but it is also to be nothing. Odysseus's pride, his desire for kleos, his need to be recognized as a specific historical individual, overrides his survival instinct. He chooses to be someone even if it means suffering, because a life lived as nobody is a life devoid of meaning. This tension between the desire for the freedom of negation and the need for the meaning of identity is a central theme in existentialist philosophy. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that existence precedes essence. We are born as nothing, as a blank slate, and we must create our own essence through our choices and actions. Odysseus is constantly creating his essence through his actions. But he is also haunted by his past, by his name, by his reputation. He is caught between the freedom of being, nobody, and the burden of being Odysseus. The philosophy of Autus teaches us that identity is not a fixed, permanent thing. It is a construct. It is something we put on and take off depending on the situation. We are all, in a sense, playing roles. We are the professional, the parent, the friend, the stranger. But beneath all those roles, there is a void. There is a core of consciousness that is unnameable, a pure subjectivity that cannot be captured by any word or title. Odysseus touches this void when he names himself nobody. He looks into the existential abyss, and he survives. But he also learns that we cannot live in the abyss. We must eventually choose a name, choose an identity, and accept the suffering and the glory that comes with it. Nobody talks about this existential dimension of the Cyclops episode, but it is the key to understanding Odysseus's psychological journey. He is not just fighting monsters. He is fighting the dissolution of his own self. He is fighting the temptation to just give up, to become nothing, to let the sea swallow him. By clinging to his name, by insisting on being Odysseus, he is asserting his will to exist, his will to create meaning in a universe that is constantly trying to reduce him to nobody. Section 5. Endurance as a moral imperative. If Metis is the mind of Odysseus, and deception is his language, then Thermosne is his body and his soul. Thermosne is the ancient Greek word for endurance, patience, and the capacity to suffer. In the Iliad, the highest virtue is courage in battle, the willingness to face death head-on. But in the Odyssey, the highest virtue is endurance. It is the ability to keep going, to suffer, to wait, and to bear the weight of unimaginable hardship without losing your mind or your purpose. Odysseus is defined by his suffering. The very first time he is introduced in the Odyssey, he is described as a man who has suffered immensely. He is the Politless, the man of many sufferings. His journey home is not just a physical voyage, it is a crucible of pain. He loses all his men. He loses his ships. He is shipwrecked repeatedly. He is tortured by the gods, mocked by monsters, and abused by strangers. and through it all, he endures. But themosine is not just passive suffering. It is not just sitting in a corner and crying. It is an active, moral imperative. It is a conscious choice to keep fighting, to keep thinking, and to keep hoping, even when all rational indicators suggest that the situation is hopeless. It is the triumph of the will over the circumstances. Consider the scene where Odysseus is stranded on the island of Ogygia, held captive by the nymph Calypso. He sits on the shore every day, weeping, looking out at the sea. He is completely powerless. He has no ship, no crew, no weapons. He's entirely at the mercy of a goddess who will not let him leave. In this situation, the natural human response would be to give up, to succumb to despair, to accept his fate and fade away. But Odysseus does not. He endures. He keeps his mind sharp. He keeps his goal in sight. He waits for the opportunity to act. When the goddess Athena finally convinces Zeus to order Calypso to release him, Odysseus is ready. He builds a raft with his own hands, and he sets sail. This capacity for endurance is what separates Odysseus from his men. Throughout the Odyssey, his men constantly fail because they lack themosine. When they are hungry, they eat the cattle of the sun god, dooming themselves. When they are tired, they open the bag of winds, blowing themselves back out to sea. They are driven by their immediate physical needs and their lack of emotional regulation. They cannot endure the discomfort of the moment, so they make catastrophic decisions. Odysseus, on the other hand, can delay his gratification. He can endure hunger, thirst, fear, and grief, because his mind is focused on the ultimate goal, returning home. This concept of endurance has strong parallels with later Stoic philosophy. The Stoics, who emerged in Greece a few centuries after the Homeric epics, believed that the universe is governed by a rational order and that human beings should accept their fate with calmness and resilience. The core Stoic virtue is apatheia, freedom from destructive emotions, and karteria, endurance. The Stoic sage is someone who can endure physical pain, loss, and hardship without being emotionally overwhelmed by them. While Odysseus is certainly not a formal Stoic, he weeps, he rages, he feels deep emotions. His thalassene is a proto-Stoic trait. He demonstrates the ability to separate his internal will from his external circumstances. He cannot control the storm, he cannot control the gods, and he cannot control the monsters. But he can control his own mind. He can control his response to the suffering. There is a profound philosophical statement here about the nature of human freedom. The Odyssey suggests that true freedom is not the absence of obstacles. True freedom is not the ability to do whatever you want whenever you want. True freedom is the internal capacity to endure whatever happens to you and to maintain your purpose and your integrity in the face of adversity. You can be stripped of your ships, your men, your clothes, and your home, but as long as you possess themosine, you are not truly defeated. This is a radical idea. In a world where power was usually measured by physical strength, wealth, or political influence, the Odyssey elevates the quiet internal strength of endurance to the highest level of heroism. It suggests that the greatest battles are not fought on the battlefield, but in the mind. The greatest enemy is not the Cyclops or the suitors, but despair. And the ultimate test of this endurance is not the physical pain, but the emotional pain. The hardest thing Odysseus has to endure is not the storm or the monster. It is the sight of his own home being violated. When he returns to Ithaca disguised as a beggar, he has to sit in his own hall and watch the suitors abuse his property, insult his servants, and court his wife. He has to watch the maids sleep with the suitors. He has to endure the ultimate humiliation. In this moment, his Tlemcen is pushed to the absolute limit. His heart barks within his chest like a dog guarding its puppies. He wants to draw his sword and kill them all right then. But he knows that if he gives into his rage, he will be overwhelmed and killed. So he strikes his own chest and speaks to his own heart, telling it to endure, to bear the pain, because he has already survived worse. This is the pinnacle of Odyssean philosophy. The ability to master one's own impulses, to subordinate the immediate desire for revenge to the long-term strategy of survival and ultimate victory. It is the ultimate expression of self-control. It is the recognition that the mind must rule the body and that reason must rule the passions. Odysseus teaches us that suffering is an inevitable part of the human condition. We cannot avoid pain, loss, and hardship, but we can choose how we respond to it. We can choose to endure. We can choose to keep our minds clear, our purpose fixed, and our will unbroken. In a universe that is often cruel and indifferent, and that is ours our greatest weapon. It is the quiet, unyielding assertion that we will not be broken, that we will not give up, and that we will keep moving forward, no matter how heavy the burden becomes. Section 6. The Ethics of Survival. To understand the ethical framework of Odysseus, we have to look at the two competing values that drive the ancient Greek hero, Kleos and Nostos. Kleos is glory, fame, the immortal reputation that lives on after you die. Nostos is the return, the homecoming, the safe journey back to your native land and your family. In the Iliad, these two values are in direct conflict, and the hero must choose between them. Achilles is faced with a choice. He can stay and fight at Troy, achieve undying Kleos, but die young. Or he can go home, live a long life, but lose his glory and be forgotten. Achilles chooses Kleos. He chooses the glorious, tragic, early death. This is the ethical foundation of the Iliadic hero. Life is short, brutal, and meaningless, except for the glory you win in battle and the songs that are sung about you after you are gone. But in the Odyssey, the ethical calculus shifts entirely. Odysseus chooses Nostos over Kleos. He chooses the return home over the immortal glory. And this choice represents a profound philosophical revolution in the Greek conception of the good life. When Odysseus goes down to the Underworld in Book 11, he meets the ghost of Achilles. Achilles is miserable. He is the king of the dead, but he would rather be a landless peasant working for a poor farmer than be the king of all the dead. Achilles tells Odysseus that the glory he won at Troy is meaningless in the face of the cold, dark reality of death. This is a devastating critique of the Iliadic value system. The epic is telling us that the pursuit of Kleos, the willingness to die young for glory, is ultimately a trap. It sacrifices the actual lived experience of life for reputation that the dead cannot enjoy. Odysseus, by contrast, is driven entirely by Nostos. He wants to live. He wants to see his wife, his son, and his home again. He is willing to suffer, to hide, to beg, and to endure unimaginable humiliation just to get back to Ithaca. This is a massive shift in ethical priorities. It moves the focus from the public, heroic sphere of the battlefield to the private, domestic sphere of the home. It suggests that the good life is not about dying gloriously for a cause. It is about living fully, maintaining your relationships, and preserving your household. This shift reflects the changing values of ancient Greece. The Iliad reflects the values of the Bronze Age warrior aristocracy, a society built on raiding, warfare, and the accumulation of honor through violence. The Odyssey reflects the values of the emerging Iron Age polis, the city-state, a society built on trade, agriculture, law, and the stability of the household, or oikos. The Odyssey is an epic for a new era, an era where the ability to navigate complex social relationships, to manage resources, and to maintain order at home is more valuable than the ability to kill enemies on a battlefield. But the choice between Kleos and Nostos is not always clear-cut. Odysseus still desires Kleos. He still wants to be recognized as a great hero. This is why he reveals his name to the Cyclops, risking his Nostos for a moment of Kleos. And this is why, when he finally returns to Ithaca, he does not just quietly sneak back into his house. He orchestrates a massive, bloody slaughter of the suitors, a feat of arms that will ensure his Kleos is remembered forever. The philosophy of Odysseus is a synthesis of these two values. He realizes that pure Kleos, the pursuit of glory at the expense of life, is foolish and tragic. But pure Nostos, the quiet return home, without any assertion of one's identity and power, is also insufficient. He needs both. He needs to survive. He needs to return home, but he also needs to re-establish his authority, to punish his enemies, and to secure his reputation. This synthesis creates a complex ethical framework. It suggests that the good life requires a balance between the public and the private, between the desire for recognition and the desire for peace. It suggests that heroism is not just about dying well, it is about living well, and about having the courage to fight for your home and your family when they are threatened. Furthermore, the pursuit of Nostos raises deep questions about the nature of time and memory. Nostos is not just a physical journey, it is a journey through time. Odysseus is trying to return to the past, to the way things were before he left for Troy. But time has moved on. His son has grown up. His wife has aged. His parents have died. The home he is trying to return to no longer exists in the exact same way. This creates a profound philosophical tension. Can you ever truly go home again? Can you recapture the past, or are you always chasing a ghost? Odysseus's journey suggests that Nostos is not about recreating the past, but about integrating the past with the present. He returns to Ithaca, not as the young warrior who left for Troy, but as the older, wiser, scarred man who has survived the world. He brings the lessons he has learned, the Metis he has developed, and the Tlemocene he has forged, and he uses them to rebuild his home. The ethics of survival, therefore, are not just about staying alive. They are about staying true to your purpose, about maintaining your identity in the face of change, and about using your experiences to build a meaningful life. Odysseus chooses life over death, the home over the battlefield, and the complex, messy reality of human relationships over the abstract, solitary glory of the hero. In doing so, he redefines what it means to be a hero, and he lays the groundwork for a more human, more accessible, and ultimately more enduring philosophy of life. Section 7. The Master of Disguise, Identity, masks and the self. We have talked about how Odysseus uses deception, how he becomes nobody, and how he chooses survival over glory. But all of these strategies rely on one fundamental philosophical concept, the nature of identity. Who is Odysseus really? Is he the king of Ithaca? Is he the hero of Troy? Is he the beggar in the hall? Or is he something else entirely? The Odyssey is obsessed with masks, disguises, and the fluidity of identity. Odysseus is constantly changing his appearance, his name, and his behavior. He is a master of disguise. He dresses as a beggar. He pretends to be a madman. He poses as a Cretan sailor. He acts like a helpless victim. He wears so many masks that it becomes difficult to tell where the mask ends and the real man begins. This raises a profound philosophical question. Is there a core, authentic self beneath all these masks? Or is the self just a collection of roles, a performance adapted to whatever situation you find yourself in? In modern philosophy, this is the debate between essentialism and constructivism. Essentialists believe that every person has a fixed inner essence, a true self that exists independent of social roles and external circumstances. Constructivists, on the other hand, argue that the self is constructed through social interaction, through language, and through the roles we play. There is no hidden, true self. There is only the self that is performed in the world. Odysseus leans heavily toward the constructivist view. His identity is highly performative. He is whoever he needs to be in order to survive and achieve his goals. When he is with the Phaeacians, he is the noble storytelling hero. When he is with the suitors, he is the pathetic, abused beggar. When he is with Penelope, he is the testing, cautious husband. He adapts his identity to fit the expectations and the needs of the moment. But the Odyssey also suggests that there is a core to Odysseus, a fundamental essence that remains constant beneath all the masks. What is that core? It is not his physical appearance, because that changes. It is not his social status, because that is stripped away. It is his mind. It is his Metis, his Theomosina, and his unwavering commitment to his nostos. This is most clearly demonstrated in the scene where his old dog, Argos, recognizes him. Argos is 20 years old, lying on a dung heap, covered in ticks, near death. When Odysseus approaches, disguised as a beggar, the dog lifts his head, sees his master, and wags his tail. Argos does not recognize the beggar's clothes. He recognizes the essence of Odysseus. He recognizes the mind, the spirit, the core identity of the man he has waited for 20 years. And then Argos dies. This is one of the most emotionally devastating scenes in literature, but it is also philosophically significant. It suggests that true identity is not about the external trappings of power or youth. It is about the enduring connection between minds, the recognition of the soul beneath the mask. Argos sees through the disguise because he is connected to the true essence of Odysseus. The recognition scenes, or anagnorisis, are the structural backbone of the Odyssey. The entire epic is built around the gradual process of Odysseus, revealing his true identity to the people he left behind. He reveals himself to Telemachus, to Eumaeus, to Euryclea, and finally to Penelope. Each recognition is a test, a negotiation, and a philosophical exploration of what it means to know someone. The most famous of these is the recognition by Penelope, Penelope is just as cunning as Odysseus. She has spent 20 years fending off the suitors, weaving and unweaving her shroud, maintaining her own masks and deceptions. When the beggar claims to be her husband, she does not just throw her arms around him, she tests him. She orders her maids to move the marital bed outside the bedroom. This is the ultimate trap. Odysseus built that bed himself, around the trunk of a living olive tree. It cannot be moved. When Penelope gives the order, Odysseus explodes in anger. He reveals the secret of the bed, and in doing so, he reveals his true identity. This scene is a masterpiece of psychological and philosophical complexity. Penelope does not recognize Odysseus by his face, or by a scar, or by a piece of clothing. She recognizes him by his mind. She recognizes his knowledge, his history, and his unique relationship to the physical world of Ithaca. The bed is the physical manifestation of their marriage rooted in the earth, immovable, and known only to them. By knowing the secret of the bed, Odysseus proves that he is not just a man who looks like her husband. He is her husband. He shares her history, her memories, and her reality. This suggests that identity is not just an internal, private thing. It is relational. We are who we are because of our relationships with others, because of our shared history, and because of the memories we hold in common. Odysseus's true identity is not just in his mind. It is in his connection to Penelope, to Ithaca, and to the life they built together. The philosophy of Odysseus teaches us that identity is a complex interplay between the internal and the external, between the core self and the social masks. We must wear masks to navigate the world, to protect ourselves, and to achieve our goals. But we must also maintain a core identity, a set of values, memories, and relationships that ground us and give our lives meaning. The danger is not in wearing the mask. The danger is in forgetting who you are beneath it. Odysseus never forgets. He wears the beggar's rags, but he never loses the mind of the king. He plays the fool, but he never loses his purpose. He is the master of disguise, but he is, ultimately, the master of himself. Sections 8. Odysseus and the Gods. No philosophical exploration of the Odyssey can ignore the role of the gods. The Homeric universe is a deeply religious one, where the gods are active, interventionist, and deeply involved in human affairs. They cause storms, they inspire courage, they disguise themselves as mortals, and they directly manipulate the outcomes of battles and journeys. This raises a massive philosophical problem. If the gods control everything, do human beings have free will? Are Odysseus's choices truly his own, or is he just a pawn in a divine game? The Odyssey presents a complex, often contradictory view of the relationship between human agency and divine determinism. On one hand, the gods are constantly interfering. Athena guides Odysseus, protects him, and gives him advice. Poseidon actively tries to destroy him. Calypso and Circe hold him captive. The gods dictate the terms of his journey, the obstacles he faces, and the ultimate outcome of his return. From this perspective, Odysseus is a victim of divine caprice, a mortal tossed around by the whims of immortal beings. But on the other hand, the Odyssey explicitly states that human beings are responsible for their own actions. In the very first book, Zeus complains that mortals blame the gods for their suffering, when in fact their own foolishness and arrogance bring about their doom. He cites the example of Augustus, who was warned by the gods not to kill Agamemnon and take his wife, but he ignored the warning and was subsequently killed by Orestes. Zeus concludes that mortals suffer beyond their fate because of their own moral failures. This is a crucial philosophical statement. It asserts that while the gods may set the parameters of the world, human beings still have the capacity to make choices, and they are morally responsible for those choices. The gods do not force you to act foolishly. They just provide the context in which your foolishness plays out. Odysseus is the ultimate example of this balance between divine influence and human agency. Athena is his patron, but she does not do the work for him. She gives him advice, she disguises him, she inspires him. But he is the one who has to execute the plans. He is the one who has to endure the suffering, make the difficult decisions, and face the consequences of his actions. When Odysseus's men eat the cattle of the sun god, they do so of their own free will. They ignore Odysseus's explicit warnings. The gods do not force them to do it. Their own hunger and lack of discipline drive them to it, and they pay the ultimate price. Similarly, when the suitors abuse Odysseus's household, they do so because of their own arrogance, their greed, and their lack of respect for the laws of hospitality. They ignore the signs, they mock the prophets, and they refuse to change their behavior. Their destruction is a direct result of their own moral choices, even though Athena ultimately guides Odysseus's hand in the slaughter. This creates a fascinating philosophical framework that anticipates later debates about compatibilism, the idea that free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive. The Odyssey suggests that human freedom exists within the boundaries set by the gods and by fate. You cannot control the storm, but you can control how you sail the ship. You cannot control the gods' decisions, but you can control your own moral choices. Odysseus's success is not just a result of Athena's favor. It is a result of his own superior intelligence, his endurance, and his moral choices. He consistently makes better choices than his men. He listens to advice, he restrains his impulses, and he respects the boundaries set by the gods. His men, on the other hand, are constantly driven by their appetites and their pride, leading to their destruction. But the Odyssey also acknowledges the terrifying power of the gods. There are moments when Odysseus is completely helpless, when the gods crush him without mercy. When Poseidon smashes his raft, Odysseus is left treading water in the open sea, facing the prospect of a horrific death. In these moments, the illusion of human control shatters. The universe is vast, indifferent, and ruled by powers that are vastly superior to us. This tension between human agency and divine power is a central theme in Greek philosophy. The tragic playwrights, like Sophocles and Euripides, explored this tension deeply, showing how human beings strive for freedom and meaning in a universe governed by incomprehensible divine forces. The Odyssey lays the groundwork for this exploration. It suggests that the human condition is defined by this struggle. We are not completely free, but we are not completely determined. We are caught in the middle, navigating a world where our choices matter, but where the ultimate outcome is always subject to forces beyond our control. Odysseus's philosophy is one of pragmatic acceptance of this reality. He does not waste time complaining about the unfairness of the gods. He does not despair when the gods thwart his plans. He accepts the limits of his power. He focuses on what he can control, and he uses his mind to navigate the constraints imposed upon him. He is a man who plays the hand he is dealt, knowing that the deck is stacked against him, but refusing to fold. This is a profoundly mature philosophical stance. It rejects both the naive optimism of those who believe they are in complete control of their destiny, and the fatalistic despair of those who believe that nothing they do matters. It embraces the complexity of the human condition, acknowledging both our profound limitations and our remarkable capacity for agency, choice, and resilience. In the face of the gods, Odysseus does not bow in submission, nor does he rebel in futile anger. He simply endures, he adapts, and he keeps moving forward, asserting his human dignity in a universe that is determined to crush it. Section 9. The Politics of Ithaca. While the Odyssey is primarily an epic about a man's journey home, it is also a deeply political text. It is a profound exploration of power, justice, leadership, and the nature of the state. Ithaca is not just a physical location, it is a political entity, a microcosm of the Greek polis, and the condition of Ithaca reflects the broader philosophical themes of the epic. When Odysseus left for Troy, he was the king of Ithaca. He was the ultimate authority, the guarantor of law, order, and justice. But in his absence, the political order has completely collapsed. The suitors have taken over his palace, consuming his wealth, harassing his wife, and plotting to kill his son. They have turned the center of political power into a site of chaos, greed, and violence. The suitors represent the ultimate failure of political virtue. They are the sons of the leading families of Ithaca, but they lack the discipline, the respect for law, and the sense of communal responsibility required to be good citizens, let alone good leaders. They are driven entirely by their own appetites and their desire for power. They ignore the assemblies, they mock the prophets, and they violate the sacred laws of hospitality. They represent the descent of the state into tyranny and anarchy, where the strong take whatever they want and the weak have no recourse. The political philosophy of the Odyssey is clear. A state cannot survive without a strong, just, and wise leader. The chaos of Ithaca is a direct result of the absence of Odysseus. His physical absence has created a power vacuum that has been filled by corruption and violence. The epic argues that the stability of the household, the oikos, is the foundation of the stability of the state, the polis. When the household is corrupted, the state follows. Odysseus's return is not just a personal homecoming. It is a political restoration. He is the legitimate king, the only one who has the authority, the intelligence, and the power to restore order to Ithaca. But his restoration of order is not achieved through democratic debate or legal process. It is achieved through violence. The slaughter of the suitors is a political act. It is the violent reassertion of the king's authority, the elimination of the corrupt elements, and the restoration of the proper political hierarchy. This raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of justice and the use of power. Is Odysseus's slaughter of the suitors an act of justice, or is it an act of brutal tyranny? He does not give them a trial. He does not offer them a chance to surrender or make restitution. He locks the doors and kills them all, including the maids who slept with them and the herald who betrayed him. He uses extreme, disproportionate violence to re-establish his authority. The Odyssey justifies this violence by portraying the suitors as irredeemable. They have committed hubris. They have violated the laws of gods and men, and they have refused to change their behavior despite repeated warnings. From this perspective, Odysseus is not just a king protecting his property. He is an agent of divine justice, cleansing the state of a moral cancer. But the epic also shows the danger of this kind of unilateral, violent restoration of power. After the slaughter, the families of the suitors rise up to seek revenge. Odysseus's victory creates a new cycle of violence, a new political crisis. It is only the intervention of Athena, acting on behalf of Zeus, that stops the civil war and establishes a lasting peace. This suggests a complex political philosophy. The Odyssey recognizes the necessity of strong leadership and the use of force to maintain order and punish injustice. But it also recognizes that violence alone is not enough to create a stable state. True political order requires the sanction of the gods, the acceptance of the community, and the establishment of a lasting peace. Furthermore, the Odyssey contrasts Odysseus's leadership with the failed leadership of other kings. Agamemnon, the king of Mycenae and the leader of the Greek forces at Troy, returns home only to be murdered by his wife and her lover. He failed to maintain order in his household, and he paid the ultimate price. Nestor, the king of Pylos, is portrayed as a wise, just, and peaceful ruler. But he is old and his power is fading. Menelaus, the king of Sparta, is wealthy and powerful, but his household is also tainted by the scandal of Helen's abduction. Odysseus is presented as the ideal king. He is not just a warrior, he is a thinker, a manager, and a judge. He understands the importance of the household, the value of loyal servants like Eumaeus and Penelope, and the necessity of maintaining the favor of the gods. He is a king who rules not just by force, but by wisdom, by Metis, and by a deep understanding of the complex social and political relationships that hold the state together. The political philosophy of the Odyssey is ultimately conservative. It advocates for the restoration of the traditional order, the authority of the king, and the stability of the household. It is deeply suspicious of the chaos that ensues when the traditional hierarchy is disrupted. But it is also deeply aware of the responsibilities that come with power. The king is not just a ruler. He is the guarantor of justice, the protector of the weak, and the moral center of the community. When the king fails in these duties, or when he is absent, the state descends into chaos. Odysseus's journey is a journey to reclaim his political authority, to restore the justice of Ithaca, and to re-establish the proper order of the world. It is a profound meditation on the nature of power, the fragility of the state, and the heavy burden of leadership. It reminds us that civilization is a fragile construct, constantly threatened by the forces of chaos and greed, and that it requires constant vigilance, wisdom, and sometimes brutal force to maintain. Sections 10. The reception of Odysseus. The philosophy of Odysseus did not end with the composition of the Homeric epics. It continued to evolve, to be debated, and to be reinterpreted by philosophers for thousands of years. To understand the full scope of Odysseus as a philosopher, we have to look at how later thinkers used his character to explain the evolution of human consciousness and the development of Western philosophy. And the most important starting point for this reception history is the German philosopher G.W.F. Hegel. In his lectures on aesthetics, Hegel provides a profound analysis of the Homeric epics, and he places Odysseus at the very center of his philosophical system. For Hegel, history is the process of the world spirit, or Geist, coming to know itself. It is the process of human consciousness evolving from a state of simple, unreflective unity with nature to a state of complex, self-aware subjectivity. Hegel argues that the Iliad represents an earlier stage of this evolution. The heroes of the Iliad, like Achilles, are substantial individuals. They are completely embedded in their social roles, their traditions, and their physical environment. They do not have a deep, inner, reflective life. Their identity is entirely external, defined by their actions in battle and their relationship to the community. They are great, but they are not yet fully self-conscious. Odysseus, according to Hegel, represents a massive leap forward in the evolution of human consciousness. He is the first truly subjective individual in Western literature. He is a man who has an inner life, a mind that reflects upon itself, that plans, that deceives, and that endures. He is not just defined by his physical actions. He is defined by his thoughts, his strategies, and his ability to navigate a complex world through the power of his own mind. Hegel writes that Odysseus is the hero of the mind, the hero who has withdrawn from the immediate, substantial life of the community and has found a center of gravity within himself. He is a man who can separate himself from his environment, who can look at the world objectively, and who can manipulate it to achieve his goals. This capacity for self-reflection, for abstraction, and for strategic thinking is, for Hegel, the birth of modern subjectivity. This is a staggering claim. Hegel is arguing that the modern mind, the mind that values individual autonomy, rational calculation, and inner reflection, was born in the character of Odysseus. The Odyssey is not just a story about a man going home. It is the story of the emergence of the modern self. Hegel focuses heavily on Odysseus's ability to endure his thymosin and his capacity for deception. For Hegel, these are not just survival tactics. They are expressions of a higher form of consciousness. The ability to deceive requires the ability to separate appearance from reality, to understand how others perceive the world, and to manipulate that perception. This is a highly advanced cognitive skill, one that requires a deep level of self-awareness and abstract thought. Furthermore, Hegel sees Odysseus's journey as an allegory for the journey of the human spirit. The wanderings of Odysseus represent the alienation of the spirit from its home, the struggle to navigate a hostile, unfamiliar world, and the ultimate return to a higher, more self-aware form of unity. Odysseus does not just return to Ithaca, he returns to himself, but a self that has been transformed by its experiences, a self that is richer, deeper, and more complex than the self that left. Hegel's interpretation of Odysseus had a massive impact on later philosophy. It established the idea that the Odyssey is not just a mythological adventure, but a profound philosophical text about the nature of human consciousness. It shifted the focus from the external actions of the hero to the internal, psychological, and spiritual development of the individual. But Hegel's interpretation also has its critics. Some argue that he is reading too much modern subjectivity into an ancient text. They argue that Odysseus is still deeply embedded in his social and religious context, and that his inner life is not as fully developed as Hegel claims. Others argue that Hegel's focus on Odysseus as the hero of the mind ignores the brutal, violent, and deeply traditional aspects of his character. Nevertheless, Hegel's analysis remains a cornerstone of the philosophical reception of Odysseus. It forces us to look at the epic not just as a story of the past, but as a foundational text for the development of the modern mind. It suggests that the struggles of Odysseus, his capacity for reflection, his ability to endure, and his quest for identity are not just ancient myths, but the very processes that define what it means to be a conscious, self-aware human being. Odysseus, in Hegel's view, is the first modern man. He is the man who looks at the world, who questions his place in it, who uses his mind to shape his destiny, and who ultimately finds his meaning not in the external approval of the gods or the community, but in the inner realization of his own identity and purpose. This is a profound philosophical legacy, one that continues to shape how we understand ourselves and our place in the world. Sections 11. The Dialectic of Enlightenment. If Hegel saw Odysseus as the birth of modern subjectivity, the philosophers of the Frankfurt School, specifically Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, saw him as something much darker. In their groundbreaking 1947 work, Dialectic of Enlightenment, Adorno and Horkheimer used the character of Odysseus to launch a devastating critique of modern Western civilization, rationality, and the concept of progress. For Adorno and Horkheimer, the history of the West is the history of the Enlightenment, the process by which human beings used reason to conquer nature, to free themselves from myth, and to establish dominion over the world. But they argue that this process has gone horribly wrong. The very reason that was supposed to liberate us has become a tool of domination, a system of instrumental reason that reduces everything, including human beings, to mere objects to be manipulated and controlled. The Enlightenment has reverted into a new form of myth, a myth of total control and efficiency that leads to alienation, oppression, and ultimately the horrors of the 20th century. And at the center of this critique is Odysseus. Adorno and Horkheimer devote a significant portion of their book to an analysis of the Odyssey, specifically the episode with the Sirens. They argue that Odysseus is the prototype of the bourgeois individual, the first man to fully embody the logic of instrumental reason. The Sirens episode is a perfect illustration of this. The Sirens are creatures of pure nature, of myth, of sensual pleasure and dangerous knowledge. They sing a song that promises to reveal all the secrets of the world, to give the listener complete knowledge and ultimate pleasure. But their song is also deadly. It lures sailors to their destruction on the rocks. Odysseus wants to hear the song. He wants the knowledge, the pleasure, the aesthetic experience. But he also wants to survive. He wants to maintain his rational control, his purpose, his nostos. So he devises a plan that perfectly encapsulates the logic of instrumental reason. He has his men plug their ears with wax so they cannot hear the song, and he has himself tied to the mast. He gives strict orders that if he begs to be untied, they must tie him tighter. For Adorno and Horkheimer, this scene is the foundational myth of modern civilization. Odysseus gets to experience the beauty and the knowledge of the siren song, but he does so in a state of complete impotence. He is tied to the mast, unable to act, unable to give in to the sensual pleasure, unable to actually engage with the mythic world. He is a pure spectator. Meanwhile, his men, whose ears are plugged, are reduced to mere instruments of his will. They do the physical labor, they row the ship, they enforce the rules. They are the proletariat, the working class, who are deaf to the aesthetic and intellectual pleasures of the world, who are completely focused on the practical task of survival and production. This, according to Adorno and Horkheimer, is the structure of modern capitalist society. The bourgeois individual, like Odysseus, gets to enjoy the fruits of culture, art, and knowledge, but only from a safe, detached distance. He is bound by the rules of rationality, by the demands of self-preservation, by the need to delay gratification and maintain control. He is free to listen to the song, but he is not free to act on it. He is a prisoner of his own rationality. And the working class, like the men with the wax in their ears, are alienated from the beauty and the meaning of the world. They are reduced to mere cogs in the machine, focused entirely on the practical tasks of production, deaf to the higher calls of art, philosophy, and human connection. Furthermore, Adorno and Horkheimer argue that Odysseus's relationship to nature is one of pure domination. He does not try to understand nature, to live in harmony with it, or to appreciate its beauty for its own sake. He tries to control it, to manipulate it, to use it for his own survival and advancement. This is the essence of instrumental reason, the reduction of the world to a set of problems to be solved, of nature to a resource to be exploited. Odysseus's cunning, his Metis, which we praised earlier as a tool of survival, is reinterpreted by Adorno and Horkheimer as the tool of domination. His ability to deceive, to manipulate, and to outsmart his opponents is not just a sign of his intelligence. It is the logic of the predator, the logic of the capitalist, the logic of the modern state. It is the logic that says that the end justifies the means, that nature and other human beings are just objects to be used for your own benefit. This is a dark, provocative, and deeply challenging interpretation of Odysseus. It strips away the heroic veneer and reveals the cold, calculating, and alienating core of the modern rational mind. It suggests that the very traits that make Odysseus a great hero, his intelligence, his self-control, his ability to delay gratification, are the same traits that lead to the alienation and domination of modern society. And that is where it gets strange, because Adorno and Horkheimer are not entirely wrong. The Odyssey does celebrate the domination of nature. It celebrates the triumph of the human mind over the chaotic, dangerous forces of the natural world. It celebrates the ability to use cunning and strategy to achieve one's goals, regardless of the cost. But the Odyssey also shows the limits of this instrumental reason. Odysseus's men are destroyed because they cannot control their appetites. Odysseus himself suffers immensely because he is constantly fighting against the forces of nature and the gods. The epic suggests that a life lived purely through instrumental reason, a life of pure calculation and control, is a life of immense suffering and alienation. Adorno and Horkheimer use Odysseus to warn us about the dangers of a society that values efficiency, control, and rational calculation above all else. They warn us that when we reduce the world to a set of problems to be solved, when we tie ourselves to the mast of our own rationality, we risk losing our humanity, our connection to nature, and our ability to experience true freedom and joy. Odysseus, in this reading, is not just the hero of the modern mind. He is the tragic figure of the modern mind. He is the man who conquered the world, but who lost his soul in the process. He is the man who heard the song of the Sirens, but who could never truly join in the dance. He is the prototype of the modern individual, isolated, controlled, and profoundly alienated from the world he seeks to master. Section 12. Odysseus in the absurd. If Hegel saw Odysseus as the birth of subjectivity, and Adorno and Horkheimer saw him as the prototype of alienated instrumental reason, The existentialist philosophers of the 20th century saw him as something else entirely, the ultimate absurd hero. And the most important voice in this interpretation is the French-Algerian philosopher and writer, Albert Camus. Camus is famous for his philosophy of the absurd, the idea that human beings have a fundamental need for meaning, order, and purpose. But the universe is completely indifferent, chaotic, and silent. This collision between our need for meaning and the universe's refusal to provide it creates the absurd. In his famous essay, The Myth of Sisyphus, Camus explores how we should respond to the absurd. Should we commit suicide? Should we turn to religion and false hope? Or should we embrace the absurd, accept the meaninglessness of the universe, and live with passion and rebellion anyway? Camus uses the figure of Sisyphus, the man condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down, as the ultimate absurd hero. Sisyphus is conscious of his futile fate, but he continues to push the boulder anyway. His rebellion, his refusal to give up, his sheer persistence in the face of meaninglessness is what gives his life meaning. While Camus focuses on Sisyphus, the philosophical framework he establishes applies perfectly to Odysseus. In fact, Odysseus is, in many ways, a more complex and compelling absurd hero than Sisyphus. Sisyphus's task is purely physical and repetitive. Odysseus's task is physical, mental, and deeply emotional. Think about the journey of Odysseus. He is trying to get home. He is driven by a deep, fundamental need to return to his wife, his son, and his identity. But the universe, represented by the gods, the sea, and the monsters, is constantly thwarting him. Every time he makes progress, a new obstacle appears. Every time he thinks he is close to home, a storm blows him off course. He loses all his men. He suffers unimaginable pain. He is held captive by goddesses who offer him immortality, which he rejects because he insists on his mortal human purpose. Odysseus is fully aware of the absurdity of his situation. He knows that the gods are playing with him. He knows that the sea is indifferent to his suffering. He knows that his men are going to die and that he might die too. But he does not give up. He does not commit suicide. He does not succumb to despair. He keeps pushing the boulder. He keeps building the raft. He keeps navigating the waves. He keeps thinking, planning, and enduring. This is the essence of the absurd hero. It is the refusal to be crushed by the meaninglessness of the universe. It is the assertion of human will, human purpose, and human dignity in the face of a cosmos that cares nothing for us. Odysseus creates his own meaning. His meaning is not given to him by the gods. It is forged by his own will, his own love for his home, and his own refusal to surrender. Camus writes that the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. We must imagine Odysseus happy too. Not happy in the sense of experiencing constant joy or pleasure, but happy in the sense of being fully alive, fully engaged in the struggle, fully committed to his purpose. His happiness is found in the struggle itself, in the exercise of his Metis, in the endurance of his Tlemosine, and in the unwavering commitment to his Nostos. The existentialist interpretation of Odysseus highlights the profound isolation of the modern individual. Odysseus is ultimately alone. Even when he is with his men, he is separated from them by his superior intelligence and his secret plans. Even when he is with the gods, he is subject to their whims. He is a man who must navigate the world using only his own mind and his own will. This resonates deeply with the existentialist concept of radical freedom and radical responsibility. We are thrown into a world we did not create, governed by rules we did not write, and we are entirely responsible for the choices we make and the meaning we create. Odysseus embodies this radical responsibility. He does not blame the gods for his suffering. He takes responsibility for his actions. He learns from his mistakes, and he keeps moving forward. But the existentialist Odysseus is also a tragic figure. His insistence on creating his own meaning, his refusal to accept the false comfort of immortality or the easy surrender to despair, condemns him to a life of constant struggle. He will never find permanent peace. He will never escape the absurdity of the human condition. He will always be the man of many turnings, the man of many sufferings, the man who must constantly fight to maintain his identity and his purpose in a world that is constantly trying to dissolve them. And that is where it gets strange, because this tragic, absurd struggle is exactly what makes Odysseus so compelling, so modern, and so deeply human. We are all, in a sense, Odysseus. We are all thrown into a chaotic, indifferent universe. We all face obstacles that seem insurmountable. We all experience loss, suffering, and alienation. And we all have to decide how we will respond. Will we give up? Will we surrender to the chaos? Or will we, like Odysseus, build a raft, tie ourselves to our purpose, and keep sailing toward a home that we may never reach, but which gives our journey meaning? Camus and the existentialists teach us that Odysseus is not just a hero of ancient Greece. He is the hero of the modern condition. He is the man who looks into the abyss of the absurd, who sees the meaninglessness of the universe, and who says, "I will push the boulder anyway. I will sail the ship anyway. I will keep going anyway." In doing so, he transforms the absurd struggle into a triumph of the human spirit. He shows us that meaning is not something we find. It is something we create through our choices, our endurance, and our unwavering commitment to the things we love. Sections 13. The Philosophy of Home. We have explored Odysseus as a master of cunning, as a philosopher of deception, as an existential hero, and as a political leader. But beneath all these layers, at the very core of his being, is a single driving force, the desire to go home. The philosophy of Odysseus is, ultimately, a philosophy of home. It is an exploration of what it means to belong, what it means to be alienated, and what it means to be a human being in a world where we are constantly searching for our place. The Greek word for homecoming is nostos. But nostos is not just a physical return to a geographical location. It is a return to a state of being. It is a return to one's identity, to one's roots, to the people and the places that define who you are. For Odysseus, Ithaca is not just an island. It is the physical manifestation of his identity. It is the place where he is king, where he is husband, where he is father, and where he is known. Throughout his journey, Odysseus experiences profound alienation. He is separated from his home, his family, and his society. He is surrounded by strangers, by monsters, by gods, who treat him as a plaything. He is physically displaced, but he is also psychologically and spiritually displaced. He is a man out of place, a man whose very presence disrupts the order of the world around him. This alienation is a central theme in modern philosophy, particularly in the works of Karl Marx, Georg Lukács, and the existentialists. Alienation is the feeling of being disconnected from your work, from your community, from your own nature, and from the world around you. It is the feeling of being a stranger in your own life. Odysseus experiences this alienation in its most extreme form. He is stripped of his ships, his men, his clothes, and his status. He is reduced to a naked, shivering castaway on the shores of Phaeacia. He is completely alienated from the material world, from society, and even from his own body, which is battered and broken by the sea. But Odysseus's response to this alienation is not to despair, nor is it to try to assimilate into the alien world. He rejects the offer of immortality from Calypso. He rejects the easy life of a guest in the palace of the Phaeacians. He insists on his difference. He insists on his identity as the man from Ithaca. He uses his alienation as a motivator, as a driving force to return to the place where he belongs. This suggests a profound philosophical insight. The feeling of alienation, the pain of being separated from our home, is not just a negative experience. It is a fundamental part of the human condition. It is the friction that drives us to seek meaning, to build communities, and to create a place for ourselves in the world. Without the pain of alienation, we would have no desire to return, no desire to build, no desire to connect. The philosophy of home in the Odyssey is deeply tied to the concept of the oikos, the household. The household is the basic unit of Greek society, the place where identity is formed, where values are transmitted, and where order is maintained. The destruction of the household, as seen in Ithaca with the suitors, is the ultimate evil, the breakdown of the social and moral order. The restoration of the household, through Odysseus's return and the slaughter of the suitors, is the ultimate good, the re-establishment of order, justice, and meaning. But the Odyssey also recognizes that the concept of home is complex and often elusive. When Odysseus finally returns to Ithaca, he does not just walk through the door and resume his old life. He has to fight for it. He has to prove his identity. He has to purge the corruption. And even after he does all this, the epic ends not with a simple, happy ending, but with the threat of further violence from the families of the suitors, a threat that is only resolved by the divine intervention of Athena. This suggests that home is not a static, permanent state. It is not a place you can just return to and find exactly as you left it. Home is a dynamic, ongoing project. It requires constant effort, constant vigilance, and constant renewal. It requires the integration of the past with the present, the reconciliation of the man who left with the man who returned. Furthermore, the philosophy of home raises the question of whether we can ever truly be at home in the universe. The gods of the Odyssey are capricious, the sea is deadly, and the world is full of monsters and dangers. The universe is not a home. It is a hostile, indifferent wilderness. Ithaca is a small, fragile island of order in a vast sea of chaos. This reflects the fundamental human condition. We are beings who need a home, who need order, meaning, and connection, but we live in a universe that is inherently chaotic, meaningless, and indifferent. We build our homes, we create our societies, we forge our relationships, but we know that they are fragile, that they can be destroyed by a storm, by a war, or by the simple passage of time. Odysseus's philosophy is one of tragic realism. He knows that his home is fragile. He knows that his life is subject to the whims of the gods and the forces of nature. He knows that he will eventually die, and that his home will eventually fade, but he chooses to fight for it anyway. He chooses to build, to protect, and to love, even though he knows it is all ultimately temporary. This is a profoundly moving and deeply human philosophy. It rejects the false comfort of eternal security, and it embraces the beautiful, tragic reality of the human condition. It suggests that the meaning of life is not found in achieving a permanent, unchanging state of bliss, but in the ongoing struggle to create and maintain a home, to build a life of meaning and connection in the face of the inevitable chaos of the universe. Nobody talks about this aspect of the Odyssey enough, but it is the emotional and philosophical core of the epic. Odysseus is not just a hero who fights monsters. He is a man who fights for the right to belong, for the right to have a home, for the right to be known and loved in a world that is constantly trying to erase him. His journey is a testament to the enduring human need for connection, for roots, and for a place to call our own. And his ultimate triumph is not just the slaughter of the suitors, but the simple, profound act of sitting at his own table with his own wife, in his own home, having reclaimed his place in the world. Section 14. The philosophy of hospitality and the ethics of the stranger. To truly understand the moral universe of the Odyssey, we have to look at how its characters treat people they do not know. In the ancient Greek world, the concept of hospitality, known as xenia, was not just a matter of good manners or polite society. It was a sacred religious obligation enforced by Zeus himself, who was known as Zeus Xenios, the protector of strangers and guests. Xenia was the fundamental glue that held the ancient Mediterranean world together in an era before formal police forces, international law, or reliable communication. It was a complex, highly ritualized system of exchange that defined the boundary between civilization and barbarism, between human society and the chaotic wilderness. When we read the Odyssey through a philosophical lens, the various episodes of Odysseus's journey can be mapped entirely onto his encounters with different systems of hospitality. The epic is essentially a grand comparative study of xenia. At one end of the spectrum, we have the Cyclops Polyphemus, who blatantly violates the laws of hospitality by eating his guests. He represents the ultimate barbarian, the creature who exists outside the moral and social order of humanity. At the other end, we have the Phaeacians, who welcome the naked, shipwrecked Odysseus with immediate generosity, offering him food, clothing, shelter, and a safe passage home without even asking his name first. They represent the ideal of civilized society. But the philosophy of xenia goes much deeper than just being nice to travelers. It is fundamentally about the ethics of the stranger, the recognition of the other, and the vulnerability of human existence. When a stranger arrives at your door, they are completely at your mercy. They have no status, no protection, and no power in your land. The host holds absolute power over the guest. The institution of xenia is a philosophical mechanism designed to mitigate this power imbalance through ritual, reciprocity, and divine sanction. It requires the host to treat the stranger with dignity, and it requires the guest to respect the host's household and not overstay their welcome. This dynamic raises profound questions about the nature of human equality and the basis of moral obligation. Why should we care for a stranger? In the Homeric worldview, the answer is rooted in the shared vulnerability of the human condition and the fear of divine retribution. You treat the stranger well because you or your children might one day be the stranger in a foreign land. It is a recognition that human fortune is fragile and unpredictable. This aligns closely with later philosophical concepts of cosmopolitanism. The Stoics, and later Immanuel Kant, would argue that all human beings belong to a single moral community, a cosmopolis, and that we have duties to strangers simply by virtue of their shared humanity. The Odyssey lays the groundwork for this idea, suggesting that the recognition of the stranger's humanity is the very foundation of civilized life. The French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas built his entire ethical system around the concept of the face of the other. Levinas argued that ethics begins the moment we encounter the face of another person, which makes an infinite demand upon us, commanding us not to kill and to respond to their vulnerability. While Levinas was writing in the 20th century, the Odyssey is grappling with this exact same philosophical problem in the Bronze Age. When Odysseus emerges from the bushes on the island of the Phaeacians, naked, covered in salt, and looking like a terrifying wild man, Nausicaa and her maids are initially frightened. They run to the edge of the river, but Odysseus uses his Metis to choose his words carefully, appealing to her sense of pity and invoking the gods. He transforms himself from a terrifying monster into a vulnerable supplicant. Nausicaa's decision to help him is a profound ethical act. She recognizes his humanity beneath the dirt and the terror, and she responds to his vulnerability with compassion. And that is where it gets strange, because the Odyssey also shows the dark side of Xenia. The suitors in Ithaca are the ultimate perverters of hospitality. They are not strangers, they are members of the local elite. But they treat Odysseus's household as if it were their own, consuming his wealth, abusing his servants, and plotting to murder his son. They have turned the sacred ritual of Xenia into a mechanism of exploitation and violence. When Odysseus returns disguised as a beggar, the suitors violate the most basic rules of hospitality by refusing to give him food and by physically abusing him. This violation of Xenia is what ultimately seals their doom. Their slaughter is not just an act of personal revenge by a jealous husband, it is the execution of divine justice for the violation of the sacred laws of the guest and the host. The philosophy of Xenia teaches us that our treatment of the stranger is the ultimate test of our moral character. It is easy to be just and kind to our friends and family who can reciprocate our actions. It is much harder to be just and kind to those who can offer us nothing in return, who are weak, vulnerable, and unknown. The Odyssey insists that a society is only as strong as its commitment to the ethics of the stranger. When the laws of hospitality break down, society descends into chaos, violence, and tyranny. When they are upheld, even in the face of fear and uncertainty, civilization survives. Odysseus's journey is a journey through a world where the rules of hospitality are constantly being tested, broken, and restored. He is the ultimate stranger, the man who is always arriving in a new land, always dependent on the goodwill of others, and always forced to navigate the complex, dangerous, and beautiful ethics of the unknown. Section 15. Odysseus and the Philosophy of Time. Time is one of the most elusive and profound concepts in philosophy, and the Odyssey is deeply obsessed with it. But the epic does not treat time as a simple, linear progression of moments. Instead, it presents a complex, multi-layered philosophy of time, where the past, present, and future constantly intersect, and where memory is the very substance that holds human identity together. For Odysseus, time is not just a sequence of events. It is a landscape he must navigate, a burden he must carry, and a force he must constantly resist. In the Homeric universe, the gods exist outside of time. They are immortal, ageless, and unchanging. They experience time as an eternal present. Mortals, on the other hand, are defined by their relationship to time. They are born, they age, and they die. Their lives are bounded by chronos, the linear, irreversible flow of time. But mortals also possess a unique cognitive tool that allows them to transcend the limits of chronos, memory, or mnemosyne. In the Odyssey, memory is not just the passive recall of past events. It is an active, creative force. It is the power to keep the past alive in the present, to use the past to shape the future, and to construct a continuous identity across the ravages of time. Odysseus's entire journey is driven by his memory of Ithaca. He is surrounded by temptations that offer him escape from the flow of time. When he lands on the island of the Lotus Eaters, the inhabitants offer him a flower that makes him forget his home and his desire to return. The lotus represents the temptation of timelessness, the desire to escape the burden of the past and the anxiety of the future by living in a perpetual, mindless present. Odysseus's men eat the lotus and immediately lose their sense of purpose, their identity, and their desire to return. They become trapped in an eternal, meaningless now. Odysseus has to physically drag them back to the ships, forcing them to re-enter the flow of time and the burden of their memories. This episode is a profound philosophical statement about the necessity of memory for human agency. Without memory, without the ability to remember who we are and where we are going, we are reduced to mere animals, driven only by immediate sensation. Similarly, the goddess Calypso offers Odysseus immortality. If he stays with her on the island of Ogygia, he will never age, never suffer, and never die. He will exist in a state of eternal, unchanging timelessness. But Odysseus rejects this offer. He chooses to return to Ithaca, to his mortal wife, and to his inevitable death. Why? Because immortality, without memory, without the continuity of a human life lived in time, is meaningless. To be human is to be temporal. It is to accept the burden of the past and the certainty of the future. Odysseus's choice is a radical affirmation of mortal time. He chooses the pain of chronological existence over the numbness of eternal timelessness. The philosophy of time in the Odyssey also explores the relationship between memory and suffering. Odysseus is a man who remembers everything. He remembers the Trojan War. He remembers his men dying. He remembers the monsters he faced. And he remembers the home he left behind. This immense burden of memory is both his greatest strength and his deepest wound. When he is sitting on the beach weeping, he is weeping because his memory of the past is in direct, painful conflict with his present reality. He is trapped between the memory of who he was and the reality of what he has become. This tension resonates deeply with the philosophy of time developed by later thinkers. St. Augustine, in his Confessions, argued that time is a distension of the mind. The past exists only as memory, the future exists only as expectation, and the present is a fleeting point of attention. For Augustine, human consciousness is essentially a temporal construct held together by the mind's ability to retain the past and anticipate the future. Odysseus embodies this Augustinian view of time. His identity is not located in his physical body, which is constantly changing, aging, and being battered by the sea. His identity is located in his mind, in his ability to hold the past Ithaca in his memory and project it into the future, his return. Furthermore, the epic explores the concept of kleos, or glory, as a form of temporal immortality. Since mortals cannot achieve the biological immortality of the gods, they achieve a form of temporal immortality through kleos. Kleos is the survival of one's name and deeds in the memory of others, transmitted through song and story. The poet is the guardian of time, the one who rescues human actions from the oblivion of death and preserves them in the eternal present of the epic tradition. When Odysseus listens to the bard Demodocus singing about the Trojan War, he weeps. He is experiencing the power of kleos. The song makes the past present. It collapses the distance of time and space, bringing the dead heroes back to life in the minds of the listeners. Nobody talks about the philosophical weight of the bard in the Odyssey, but Demodocus and Phemius are not just entertainers. They are the philosophers of time in the Homeric world. They demonstrate that while the body is subject to the destructive flow of Chronos, the mind, through memory and song, can achieve a form of mastery over time. Odysseus's journey is ultimately a journey to reclaim his place in the temporal order of his own life. He must return to Ithaca to close the gap between his past and his present, to integrate his experiences into a coherent narrative, and to secure his kleos so that his memory will survive the inevitable arrival of his own death. The philosophy of the Odyssey teaches us that we are, fundamentally, the stories we remember and the memories we choose to carry forward into the future. Section 16. The Feminine Principle, Penelope, Circe, and the Philosophy of Gender and Power. To read the Odyssey solely as the story of a male hero conquering the world is to miss half of its philosophical depth. The epic is profoundly engaged with the feminine principle, exploring the nature of gender, power, knowledge, and the domestic sphere. The women of the Odyssey are not mere background characters or passive objects of exchange. They are active, intelligent, and deeply complex agents who shape the course of the narrative and embody distinct philosophical worldviews. Through characters like Penelope, Circe, Calypso, and Nausicaa, the epic investigates the tension between the male sphere of warfare and public glory and the female sphere of the household, craft, and enduring wisdom. Penelope is the most philosophically significant female character in the epic. She is not just a faithful wife waiting for her husband to return. She is Odysseus's intellectual equal, his partner in cunning, and the ultimate guardian of the household, or oikos. While Odysseus is wandering the sea, Penelope is fighting her own war in Ithaca. She is surrounded by over 100 aggressive, violent suitors who are consuming her husband's wealth and threatening her son's life. She has no physical power to stop them. She cannot fight them with a sword. So, she uses her mind. She uses deception, delay, and psychological manipulation to survive. Her most famous act of cunning is the weaving and unweaving of the Great Shroud. For 3 years, she promises the suitors that she will choose a husband once she finishes weaving a burial shroud for her father-in-law, Laertes. She weaves it by day and secretly unpicks it by night. This act is a profound philosophical statement about the nature of female power and the philosophy of craft. Weaving is a traditionally female activity associated with the domestic sphere, but Penelope turns it into a weapon of political resistance. Her loom is her shield. The act of weaving and unweaving represents the cyclical nature of time in the household, the endless labor of maintenance, and the ability to create and destroy in order to preserve the core identity of the home. Penelope's Metis perfectly mirrors Odysseus's Metis. She is the master of the domestic sphere, proving that intelligence and strategy are not the exclusive domain of male warriors. The relationship between Odysseus and Penelope is the philosophical heart of the epic. It is a partnership based on mutual recognition of each other's intellect. When Odysseus finally returns, he does not just reveal himself. He tests her, and she tests him. The recognition scene around the immovable bed is the ultimate expression of this equality. The bed, built around the living olive tree, is a symbol of their marriage, rooted in the earth, unmovable, and known only to them. Penelope's knowledge of the bed's secret is the proof of her identity and her equal standing with Odysseus. The epic suggests that the highest form of human relationship is not based on physical dominance or mere biological reproduction, but on a deep, intellectual, and spiritual partnership between equals. But the epic also explores the darker, more dangerous aspects of the feminine principle through the figures of Circe and Calypso. These goddesses represent the terrifying, seductive power of nature and the threat of male dissolution. Circe is a witch who transforms men into animals. Philosophically, this is not just a magical trick, it is a metaphor for the loss of human reason and the descent into pure, unreflective animal appetite. When Odysseus's men eat Circe's food, they lose their human consciousness and become pigs. They are reduced to their base physical desires, completely controlled by their environment. Circe represents the danger of the sensual world, the temptation to abandon the struggle of human consciousness and surrender to the easy, mindless pleasures of nature. Odysseus, however, is protected by the herb moly given to him by Hermes. Moly represents divine reason, the intellectual tool that allows him to resist the seductive, destructive power of the goddess. He confronts Circe not with physical force, but with his mind and his divine protection. He forces her to restore his men to their human form. This episode is a profound allegory for the philosophical struggle to maintain human rationality in the face of overwhelming sensual temptation. It suggests that the feminine principle, when untamed by reason, can reduce men to beasts, but when engaged with intellectually, it can become a source of knowledge and guidance. Circe ultimately helps Odysseus by telling him how to navigate the dangers of the journey home, including the visit to the Underworld. She transitions from a threat to his identity to a crucial advisor in his philosophical education. Calypso, whose name means the concealer, represents another aspect of the feminine principle, the temptation of oblivion. She offers Odysseus eternal life, but at the cost of his identity, his memory, and his return to the human world. She represents the maternal, enveloping power of nature that seeks to absorb the individual back into the undifferentiated whole. Odysseus's rejection of Calypso is a rejection of this dissolution. He chooses the painful, finite reality of human life, with all its struggles and sorrows, over the painless, meaningless eternity of the goddess. The French feminist philosopher Luce Irigaray argued that Western philosophy has traditionally marginalized the feminine, associating it with nature, matter, and passivity, while elevating the masculine as the realm of culture, form, and active reason. The Odyssey, however, presents a much more complex picture. The feminine in the epic is not passive. It is a powerful, active, and often dangerous force that the masculine must negotiate with, resist, and ultimately integrate. Penelope's wisdom, Circe's knowledge, and Calypso's power are essential to Odysseus's journey. The philosophy of the Odyssey suggests that true human excellence requires a synthesis of the masculine and the feminine, a balance between the active struggle of the warrior and the enduring, preserving wisdom of the household. It is only by recognizing and respecting the power of the feminine principle that Odysseus is able to reclaim his identity and restore order to his world. Section 17. Odysseus and the Philosophy of Death and the Afterlife. No journey in the history of literature is as philosophically significant as Odysseus's descent into the underworld, the Nekia, in Book 11 of the Odyssey. This is not just a spooky adventure or a chance to meet dead friends. It is a profound, terrifying, and deeply unsettling exploration of the philosophy of death, the nature of the soul, and the limits of human knowledge. In the ancient Greek worldview, the underworld, or Hades, is not a place of moral reward and punishment like the Christian hell or heaven. It is a shadowy, miserable realm where all dead souls, regardless of their deeds in life, exist in a state of joyless, mindless oblivion. To understand the philosophical weight of this episode, we have to look at how the Odyssey conceptualizes the soul, or psyche. In the Homeric epics, the psyche is not the immortal, rational soul of later Platonic philosophy. The psyche is simply the breath of life, the vital force that animates the body. When a person dies, the psyche leaves the body and descends to Hades, where it becomes a shade and eidolon, a mere image or shadow of the person who once lived. The shade retains the appearance and the memories of the living person, but it lacks physical substance, strength, and true consciousness. It is a pathetic, diminished existence. When Odysseus travels to the edge of the world to consult the blind prophet Tiresias, he has to perform a blood ritual. He digs a trench and pours libations of milk, honey, and wine, and then he sacrifices sheep, letting their blood flow into the trench. The shades of the dead are drawn to the blood, because drinking it temporarily restores their consciousness and ability to speak. This ritual is a profound philosophical statement about the relationship between life, death, and knowledge. The dead are cut off from the vital force of life. They are trapped in a state of non-being. To gain knowledge from them, the living must temporarily bridge the gap between the living and the dead, offering the substance of life to the realm of death. When Odysseus's mother, Anticlea, approaches the trench, she explains the grim reality of Hades. She tells him that the body is consumed by the fire of the pyre, and the psyche flits about like a dream. This is a stark, materialist view of death. There is no spiritual transcendence, no reunion with a divine source. Death is simply the cessation of the physical body and the reduction of the self to a meaningless shadow. This realization forces Odysseus and the audience to confront the absolute finality of death. It strips away any comforting illusions about an afterlife and forces a confrontation with the sheer, terrifying void of non-existence. The most philosophically devastating moment in the underworld is Odysseus's encounter with the shade of Achilles. Achilles, the greatest hero of the Iliad, the man who chose glorious death over a long, obscure life, is now standing in the mud of Hades. When Odysseus praises him, saying he was honored like a god in life and is now a king among the dead, Achilles responds with one of the most famous and heartbreaking lines in all of literature. He says he would rather be a landless peasant working for a poor man with no property than be the king of all the dead. This is a total repudiation of the Iliadic value system. In the Iliad, Achilles chose Kleos, the immortal glory of song, over a long life. He believed that the glory was worth the sacrifice. But in the Odyssey, standing in the realm of the dead, Achilles reveals that Kleos is meaningless to the one who is dead. The glory exists only in the minds of the living. For the dead, there is no glory, no honor, no pleasure. There is only the cold, dark, and miserable reality of non-being. This is a profound philosophical critique of the heroic ethos. It suggests that the pursuit of glory at the expense of life is a tragic illusion. The only thing that truly matters is the actual, lived experience of being alive, the warmth of the sun, the touch of another human being, the simple reality of physical existence. This encounter forces a shift in the philosophical focus of the epic. It moves the ideal of human excellence away from the glorious death of the warrior and toward the preservation of life, the endurance of suffering, and the return to the warmth of the living world. Odysseus's journey to the underworld is a journey to the absolute limit of human experience. He looks into the void, he sees the ultimate fate that awaits all human beings, and he chooses to turn back. He chooses life. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger argued that human existence is defined by being towards death. We are beings who are constantly aware of our own mortality, and this awareness shapes how we live. Odysseus's descent into the underworld is the ultimate confrontation with being towards death. He does not just think about his mortality in the abstract. He physically walks into the realm of the dead. He speaks to the shades, and he witnesses the absolute reduction of the greatest heroes to meaningless shadows. This experience fundamentally changes him. It strips away his remaining illusions about glory and heroism. It grounds his philosophy entirely in the reality of mortal life. He returns to the world of the living with a profound, unshakable commitment to survival, to his home, and to the fragile, beautiful reality of being alive. That Nekia teaches us that the awareness of death is not a reason to despair, but the very condition that makes life precious, urgent, and worth fighting for. Section 18. Phenomenology of the body and material culture in the Odyssey. When we think of philosophy, we usually think of abstract concepts, logic and metaphysics. We rarely think about physical objects, tools, and the human body. But the Odyssey is deeply engaged with the philosophy of material culture and the phenomenology of the body. In the Homeric world, identity is not just an internal psychological state. It is deeply embedded in physical objects, in the material environment, and in the specific lived experience of the body. The epic suggests that we cannot understand who Odysseus is without understanding the things he touches, the scars he carries, and the tools he uses. The most famous physical marker of Odysseus's identity is his scar. He received it when he was a young man, during a boar hunt on Mount Parnassus. The scar is a permanent physical inscription of his past onto his body. It is a text written in flesh. When Odysseus returns to Ithaca disguised as a beggar, his old nurse, Eurycleia, is washing his feet. She feels the scar and instantly recognizes him. The scar is the ultimate token of identity. It bypasses the disguise, the old age, the dirt, and the rags, and reveals the true man beneath. Philosophically, the scar represents the inescapability of the past. You can change your clothes, you can change your name, you can change your behavior, but you cannot erase the physical history written on your body. The scar is a permanent reminder of Odysseus's youth, his violence, his connection to his grandfather Autolycus, and his entry into the world of adult male responsibility. it anchors his identity in a specific historical physical reality. The French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty argued that the body is not just an object in the world, it is our primary way of knowing and interacting with the world. Our identity is fundamentally embodied. The Odyssey anticipates this phenomenological insight. Odysseus's body is not just a vessel for his mind, it is a repository of his history, a physical manifestation of his identity that cannot be completely hidden or erased. But the epic also explores the philosophy of objects through the tools of the household, specifically the bow and the bed. The bed, as we discussed, is the immovable center of the marriage, rooted in the living earth. The bow, on the other hand, is the instrument of cosmic order and royal authority. When Penelope sets the contest of the bow, she is not just looking for a new husband, she is setting a physical test that only the true king can pass. The bow is a highly technical, complex object. It requires immense physical strength to string, but it also requires precise skill and knowledge to shoot. When Odysseus, still disguised as the beggar, takes the bow, the moment is charged with profound philosophical significance. He examines the bow, checking for worm damage, treating it with the care of a master craftsman. He strings it easily, like a man stringing a lyre, and shoots the arrow cleanly through the 12 axe heads. This is not just a display of physical strength, it is the reassertion of his identity through his mastery of material culture. The bow recognizes its master. The physical object responds to the specific embodied skill of the man who created and maintained it. The Indian anthropologist Arjun Appadurai wrote about the social life of things, arguing that objects are not just passive tools, they have social biographies, they accumulate meaning, and they mediate human relationships. In the Odyssey, objects are deeply saturated with meaning and memory. The bow is not just a weapon, it is the symbol of Odysseus's kingship, his physical excellence, and his rightful place in the social order. When the suitors fail to string the bow, it is not just because they are weak, it is because they lack the legitimate, embodied connection to the household that Odysseus possesses. They are usurpers, and the physical world of Ithaca rejects them. This focus on material culture challenges the later Platonic dualism that elevates the mind and the soul above the physical body and the material world. In the Odyssey, the mind and the body, the intellect and the material world are deeply integrated. Odysseus's Metis is not just abstract cleverness, it is a practical, embodied intelligence that knows how to handle tools, how to read the physical environment, and how to manipulate material objects to achieve his goals. He is a man who knows the weight of a ship's mast, the tension of a bowstring, the texture of a woven shroud, and the specific grain of an olive tree. The philosophy of the Odyssey teaches us that human identity is not just a ghost in a machine. We are physical beings embedded in a material world, defined by the scars on our bodies and the tools in our hands. Our relationships with objects, with the land, and with the physical environment are fundamental to who we are. When Odysseus slaughters the suitors, he is not just defending his life. He is defending his physical world, his household, his tools, and his embodied presence in Ithaca. He is reclaiming his rightful place in the material order of the universe. The epic reminds us that to be human is to be physical, to be embedded in the world of things, and to find meaning not just in abstract thought, but in the tangible, lived reality of our bodies and our environment. Section 19. The appropriation of the hero in Hellenistic philosophy. The philosophy of Odysseus did not remain static after the composition of the Homeric epics. As Greek culture evolved, moving from the archaic period into the classical and Hellenistic eras. The philosophical interpretation of Odysseus underwent a massive transformation. The most significant of these transformations occurred with the rise of Stoicism. The Stoics, who emerged in Athens in the early 3rd century BCE under the leadership of Zeno of Citium, fundamentally reinterpreted the character of Odysseus, turning him from a cunning, pragmatic survivor into the ultimate philosophical sage, the embodiment of Stoic virtue and rational endurance. To understand this shift, we have to look at the core tenets of Stoic philosophy. The Stoics believed that the universe is governed by a rational divine principle, the Logos. Human beings possess a fragment of this divine reason, and the goal of human life is to live in accordance with nature and reason. This requires the cultivation of virtue, which is the only true good, and the achievement of apatheia, freedom from destructive, irrational passions. The Stoic sage is someone who remains completely tranquil and rational, regardless of external circumstances, accepting the dictates of fate with calm equanimity. When the Stoics looked at the Homeric epics, they faced a problem. The heroes of Homer, particularly Achilles and Odysseus, were deeply emotional, prone to rage, grief, and fear. They did not look like Stoic sages. So, the Stoics developed a method of allegorical interpretation. They argued that the Homeric epics were not just literal stories, but encoded philosophical texts that contained deep truths about the nature of the universe and the human soul. By reading the epics allegorically, they could transform the flawed, emotional heroes of Homer into perfect models of Stoic virtue. Odysseus was the perfect candidate for this Stoic appropriation. His defining trait, his tanmisten or endurance, was easily mapped onto the Stoic virtue of karteria, the ability to endure hardship without complaint. His ability to control his impulses, to delay gratification, and to use his reason to navigate dangerous situations made him an ideal model of the Stoic sage. The Stoics reinterpreted his wanderings not as a physical journey, but as an allegory for the journey of the human soul through the trials and temptations of life. For example, the Stoics interpreted the Sirens as the temptations of false knowledge and sensual pleasure. Odysseus tying himself to the mast represents the rational soul binding itself to reason to resist the destructive pull of the passions. The lotus eaters represent the danger of forgetting one's rational purpose and succumbing to mindless pleasure. Circe represents the degradation of reason by base appetites, and her transformation of men into animals is an allegory for the loss of human rationality. Odysseus's use of the herb moly, given by Hermes, is the triumph of philosophical wisdom over sensual temptation. The Stoic philosopher Chrysippus, one of the most important figures in the early Stoic school, wrote extensively on this allegorical interpretation. He argued that Odysseus was the model of the wise man who navigates the stormy sea of life, keeping his mind focused on virtue and reason, regardless of the external chaos around him. The later Roman Stoics, like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, continued this tradition. Epictetus, who was a slave before becoming a famous Stoic teacher, frequently used Odysseus as an example of how to endure physical hardship, abuse, and misfortune without losing one's inner freedom and rationality. This Stoic reinterpretation had a massive impact on the reception of Odysseus in the ancient world. It shifted the focus away from his cunning and deception, which were often viewed with suspicion by later moralists, and elevated his endurance, his self-control, and his rationality. The Stoic Odysseus was not a trickster. He was a philosopher. He was a man who had achieved inner freedom, a man who understood that true happiness depends not on external circumstances, but on the internal state of the soul. The French philosopher Pierre Hadot, argued that ancient philosophy was not just a theoretical discourse, but a way of life, a set of spiritual exercises designed to transform the practitioner's way of being in the world. The Stoic reading of the Odyssey perfectly aligns with this concept. The epic was not just a story to be analyzed, it was a text to be lived, a source of spiritual exercises and moral guidance. By reading Odysseus as a Stoic sage, the Hellenistic philosophers turned the epic into a manual for living, a guide for navigating the inevitable suffering and chaos of human existence with reason, virtue, and unshakable tranquility. And that is where it gets strange, because this Stoic reading completely ignores the darker, more brutal aspects of Odysseus's character. The Stoic Odysseus is a sanitized, idealized figure. He does not weep on the beach. He does not rage against the gods. He does not brutally slaughter his enemies in a fit of bloody vengeance. The Stoics had to selectively read the text, emphasizing certain episodes while ignoring or explaining away others to fit Odysseus into their philosophical framework. But this act of reinterpretation is itself a profound philosophical statement. It demonstrates the power of the philosophical tradition to appropriate, transform, and reshape cultural myths to serve its own moral and intellectual needs. The Stoic Odysseus shows us that the meaning of a text is never fixed. It is constantly being renegotiated by each new generation of readers, each bringing their own philosophical concerns and moral frameworks to the ancient words. Section 20. The Medieval Transformation and the Philosophy of Bounds. As the ancient world gave way to the Middle Ages, the philosophical interpretation of Odysseus underwent another radical transformation, this time under the influence of Christian theology. The most profound and influential medieval reimagining of the hero occurs in Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, specifically in Canto 26 of the Inferno. Dante's Ulysses is a far cry from the pragmatic, enduring survivor of the Homeric epics, or the rational, virtuous sage of the Stoics. Dante's Ulysses is a tragic, damned figure, the embodiment of intellectual pride, fraudulent counsel, and the dangerous, sinful desire to transcend the limits set by God. To understand Dante's philosophical critique of Ulysses, we have to look at the structure of hell in the Inferno. Dante's hell is a highly ordered moral universe, structured according to the severity of the sins committed. Ulysses is placed in the 8th circle, the Malabolge, specifically in the 8th pouch, which is reserved for the counselors of fraud. He is wrapped in a tongue of fire, sharing this punishment with his companion Diomedes. They are punished for their deceptive strategies, most notably the creation of the Trojan horse, but also for other acts of cunning and trickery. But Dante's Ulysses is not just punished for his political or military fraud. In a breathtaking act of poetic imagination, Dante invents a completely new ending for Ulysses, one that has no basis in the Homeric epics or the classical tradition. In Dante's version, after Ulysses returns to Ithaca and reunites with his family, he is unable to rest. The desire for knowledge, the desire to explore the world and experience everything life has to offer, becomes an insatiable, burning passion within him. He gathers his remaining men, sails past the Pillars of Hercules, and ventures into the uncharted ocean of the southern hemisphere. He gives his men a famous soaring speech, urging them not to live like brutes, but to follow virtue and knowledge. Consider your origin, he tells them. You were not formed to live like brutes, to follow virtue and knowledge. This speech is one of the most beautiful and tragic passages in all of literature. It is a powerful assertion of the human drive for exploration, for intellectual discovery, and for the transcendence of our physical limits. But in Dante's Christian universe, this drive is a sin. The Pillars of Hercules were placed there by God to mark the boundary of the known world, a physical limit set by divine authority. By sailing past them, Ulysses is not just exploring, he is transgressing. He is committing the sin of hubris, the arrogant attempt to exceed the boundaries set by the Creator. He is seeking knowledge and experience that are not meant for mortal men. This is a profound philosophical shift. In the Odyssey, Odysseus's desire to return home, his nostos, is the highest virtue. His curiosity and his cunning are tools used to achieve that return. But in Dante, the desire for knowledge, when untethered from divine grace and moral restraint, becomes a destructive, demonic force. Ulysses's voyage beyond the Pillars is a philosophical allegory for the limits of human reason. It suggests that human intellect, no matter how brilliant, has boundaries. When it tries to transcend those boundaries, when it tries to grasp the infinite without the guidance of faith, it leads to destruction. Shortly after giving his speech, Ulysses's ship is caught in a massive whirlwind summoned by God, and it is sucked down into the depths of the ocean. Ulysses is damned. His pursuit of knowledge leads not to enlightenment, but to eternal destruction. Dante's Ulysses represents the medieval Christian synthesis of classical philosophy and theology. It acknowledges the beauty and the power of the classical ideal of intellectual curiosity, the desire to follow virtue and knowledge. But it subordinates that ideal to the higher truth of Christian revelation and divine law. It warns that the unaided human intellect, the intellect that relies solely on its own power and refuses to submit to divine authority, is ultimately flawed and dangerous. The philosopher Jacques Derrida wrote extensively about the concept of the limit, arguing that philosophy is always concerned with drawing boundaries, with defining what is inside and what is outside, what is permissible and what is transgressive. Dante's Ulysses is the ultimate philosophical figure of the limit. He is the man who cannot accept the boundary. He is the embodiment of the transgressive desire to go beyond, to see what is on the other side, to push the limits of human experience to the absolute edge. And that is where it gets strange, because despite his damnation, Dante's Ulysses is deeply compelling. His speech to his men is so inspiring, so full of the noble, tragic desire to push the boundaries of human potential, that readers for centuries have felt a profound sympathy for him. He is the prototype of the modern scientific explorer, the Renaissance man, the relentless seeker of truth who refuses to accept the limits of the known world. Dante intended him to be a warning against intellectual pride, but he inadvertently created one of the most powerful symbols of the human drive for discovery in Western literature. Dante's Ulysses shows us the philosophical tension between the desire for boundless knowledge and the recognition of our human limits, a tension that continues to define the modern scientific and philosophical enterprise. Section 21. Modernism, the mundane, and the philosophy of the everyday. If Dante transformed Odysseus into a tragic figure of intellectual transgression, the modernist writer James Joyce transformed him into something entirely different, an ordinary, middle-class, deeply flawed, and profoundly human advertising canvasser named Leopold Bloom. Joyce's 1922 novel, Ulysses, is one of the most important works of modern literature, and it uses the structural framework of the Homeric Odyssey to elevate the mundane, the everyday, and the bodily functions to the level of epic poetry. In doing so, Joyce creates a radical new philosophy of the everyday, a democratic, anti-heroic vision of human life that completely dismantles the traditional concept of the hero. Joyce's novel takes place on a single day, June 16, 1904, in Dublin, Ireland. The events of the novel correspond loosely to the episodes of the Odyssey. Leopold Bloom is Odysseus, his wife, Molly Bloom, is Penelope, and the young aspiring writer Stephen Dedalus is Telemachus. But there are no monsters, no gods, and no epic battles. Instead, Bloom attends a funeral, eats a kidney for breakfast, wanders around the city, goes to a maternity hospital, visits a brothel, and finally returns home to his wife. The philosophical revolution of Ulysses lies in its radical redefinition of what constitutes an epic subject. For thousands of years, the epic was reserved for kings, warriors, and gods. It was about the founding of nations, the slaughter of enemies, and the intervention of the divine. Joyce takes this elevated form and applies it to the most ordinary, trivial, and seemingly insignificant aspects of daily life. He writes about Bloom's digestive processes, his sexual fantasies, his grief over the death of his infant son, his financial worries, and his observations of the people he passes on the street. This is a profound philosophical statement about the value of human experience. Joyce argues that the life of an ordinary, unheroic man is just as complex, just as tragic, and just as worthy of artistic and philosophical attention as the life of a mythical king. The epic is not dead. It has just moved indoors into the minds and bodies of ordinary people. This aligns with the philosophical shift in the late 19th and early 20th centuries toward phenomenology and the philosophy of the everyday. Thinkers like William James, with his concept of the stream of consciousness, and later phenomenologists like Edmund Husserl and Alfred Schutz, argued that the lived experience of everyday life, the mundane reality of the ordinary person, is the fundamental basis of all human knowledge and meaning. Joyce uses the stream of consciousness technique to immerse the reader directly into the minds of his characters. We do not just observe Bloom from the outside. We experience the world through his senses, his memories, his associative leaps, and his internal monologues. This technique reveals the incredible depth and complexity of the ordinary mind. Bloom's thoughts are a chaotic, beautiful, and deeply human mixture of high philosophy, vulgar jokes, scientific curiosity, sexual desire, and profound tenderness. He is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is cuckolded by his wife's lover, Blazes Boylan. He is socially marginalized because he is a Jewish man in Catholic Dublin. He is physically unimposing and often cowardly. But Joyce presents Bloom's ordinary decency, his empathy, his curiosity, and his capacity for love as a higher form of heroism. In the Cyclops episode, Bloom is confronted by a violently nationalistic, anti-Semitic citizen in a pub. Bloom responds not with violence, but with a calm, rational plea for tolerance and definition. He says, "And I belong to a race too that is hated and persecuted." Also now, this very moment, this very instant. Bloom's heroism is the heroism of non-violence, of empathy, of the quiet, persistent assertion of human dignity in the face of prejudice and ignorance. The French philosopher Henri Lefebvre wrote extensively on the critique of everyday life, arguing that the mundane routines of daily life are not just a backdrop for historical events, but the very site where human alienation and human potential are negotiated. Joyce's Ulysses is the ultimate literary realization of this philosophy. It insists that the everyday is not a trivial distraction from the real business of life. It is the real business of life. The way we eat, the way we mourn, the way we interact with our neighbors, the way we experience our own bodies, these are the fundamental philosophical realities of human existence. Nobody talks about the philosophical importance of Bloom's breakfast, but the scene where he cooks and eats a kidney is a masterpiece of material phenomenology. Joyce describes the smell of the cooking meat, the texture of the kidney, the taste, the physical sensation of eating, and the subsequent bodily functions. This is not just gratuitous realism. It is a philosophical rejection of the mind-body dualism that has dominated Western philosophy since Plato. Joyce insists that we are not just minds trapped in bodies, we are embodied beings, and our physical, sensual, and bodily experiences are the foundation of our consciousness. By mapping the structure of the Odyssey onto a single ordinary day in Dublin, Joyce creates a profound philosophical irony. The epic framework elevates the mundane, but the mundane content simultaneously deflates the epic. It suggests that the grand mythical narratives of heroes and gods are ultimately less real, less important, and less interesting than the messy, complicated, and beautiful reality of ordinary human life. Joyce's Ulysses teaches us that we do not need to slay monsters or sail the wine-dark sea to find meaning. We only need to pay attention to the world immediately around us, to the people we pass on the street, to the bodies we inhabit, and to the quiet, unheroic endurance of everyday life. Section 22. Odysseus and the Philosophy of Emotion. To fully grasp the philosophical depth of Odysseus, we must examine how he experiences and manages his emotions. The Homeric epics present a highly specific, deeply complex psychology that is vastly different from our modern understanding of the mind. Today, we tend to view the mind as a unified, centralized command center located in the brain, and we treat emotions as internal, subjective, psychological states. But in the Odyssey, emotions are not just abstract feelings. They are experienced as external, physical forces that literally act upon the body. The epic explores the intense tension between the overwhelming, visceral power of these emotional forces and the human capacity for rational self-regulation, a tension that lies at the very heart of Odysseus's philosophical journey. To understand this, we have to look at the groundbreaking work of classical scholars like Bruno Snell, whose seminal book, The Discovery of the Mind, revolutionized how we read ancient Greek psychology, and James Redfield, who further explored the embodied nature of the Homeric soul. In the Homeric worldview, the psyche, which literally means the midriff or diaphragm, but in Homer it is associated with deep thought, planning, and deliberation. This is why we still use phrases like gut feeling. Today, the Greeks literally thought thinking happened in the chest and belly. There is the kredi, or etor, the physical heart, which is associated with courage, fear, and physical endurance. And finally, there is the nous, the mind or intellect, which is the highest faculty of perception, recognition, and long-term strategic understanding. Crucially, emotions in Homer are not described as things generated by a unified I. They are described as things that happen to these physical organs. When Odysseus feels anger, it is not just a mental state. His thymos literally swells and boils within his chest. When he feels grief, his heart grows heavy and his friends are filled with sorrow. This fragmented, physicalized psychology makes the management of emotion a constant, physical, and often painful struggle. Because of this, it is a massive misconception to view Odysseus as a Stoic sage. The Stoics, as we discussed in section 19, aimed for apatheia, the complete eradication of irrational passions. Odysseus is not a Stoic. He is not completely free from passions. He feels blinding rage. He feels paralyzing terror. He feels overwhelming, suicidal grief, and he feels intense, aching desire. The philosophical triumph of Odysseus is not the absence of emotion, but his incredible ability to regulate it. His heroism lies in his capacity to subordinate the impulsive, reactive drives of the thymos to the rational, calculating foresight of the nous. The most striking, visceral example of this emotional regulation occurs in Book 20 of the Odyssey, when Odysseus finally returns to Ithaca and enters his own hall, disguised as an old, filthy beggar. He is forced to sit in the ashes and watch the suitors abusing his property, insulting him, and throwing objects at him. The situation escalates when a suitor named Ctesippus hurls a cow's hoof at Odysseus's head, and the disloyal maidservants sneak out to sleep with the suitors, laughing and mocking the beggar. This is a profound, humiliating violation of his household, his body, and his honor. The text describes his emotional reaction in vivid, terrifyingly physical terms. Homer writes that the heart within him barked in his rage. This is a masterpiece of Homeric psychology. By using the word barked, Homer compares Odysseus's emotional center to a mother dog guarding her puppies. A mother dog doesn't calculate, she doesn't strategize, she reacts with pure, unadulterated, protective violence. His tymos is surging, urging him to draw his sword, leap up, and slaughter every single man in the room right then and there. This is a moment of extreme psychological crisis. The emotional drive for immediate, violent revenge is absolutely overwhelming. If he gives in to the barking heart, he will kill a few suitors, but he will inevitably be overwhelmed and killed himself, failing his ultimate mission. But here, Odysseus's nous, his rational mind, his intellect, intervenes. He physically strikes his own chest to quiet the physical organ of his passion, and he literally speaks to his heart. He says, "Endure, my heart. You have endured worse than this on that day when the Cyclops, in his terrible strength, ate my brave companions. Even then you endured, until your cunning mind got you out of the cave." This scene is a profound philosophical statement. Odysseus is treating his emotional center as a separate, almost wild entity that needs to be reasoned with, commanded, and controlled. He is using his memory of past suffering to contextualize his current pain. He is essentially telling his heart, "Look, we survived being eaten alive by a monster. You can survive these arrogant idiots throwing cow hooves at you." He uses the rational mind to soothe, discipline, and leash the passionate heart. He forces himself to endure the humiliation, subordinating his immediate emotional impulse to his long-term strategic goal of survival and ultimate victory. The American philosopher Martha Nussbaum, in her monumental book Upheavals of Thought, The Intelligence of Emotions, argues against the idea that emotions are just blind, irrational, animalistic impulses. Instead, she argues that emotions are deeply cognitive. They are judgments about what is valuable and important to our flourishing. Emotions are tied to our beliefs about the world and our place in it. When Odysseus feels rage, it is because his nous recognizes that his oikos is being unjustly violated. His anger is a rational judgment of injustice. However, Nussbaum also points out that while emotions are cognitive, they are often flawed or short-sighted in their immediate judgments. Odysseus's emotional regulation in Book 20 is not just a matter of brute force suppression, it is a matter of cognitive reframing. He recognizes that his immediate anger, while morally justified, is strategically useless and ultimately self-destructive. He uses his rational mind to re-evaluate the situation, to zoom out, to delay his emotional response, and to align his actions with his overarching purpose. In modern psychological terms, Odysseus is performing ancient cognitive behavioral therapy on himself, interrupting the automatic negative response and replacing it with a regulated, goal-oriented perspective. This capacity for emotional self-regulation is exactly what separates Odysseus from his men and what separates him from the suitors. His crew is constantly destroyed by their inability to regulate their emotions and appetites. They open the bag of winds because their greedy curiosity overrides their discipline. They eat the sacred cattle of the sun god because they cannot endure the physical pain of hunger and the despair of being stranded. They are ruled by their tynos and their stomachs, lacking the nous to see the long-term consequences. The suitors, on the other hand, are driven entirely by their unchecked thymos. They are ruled by lust, gluttony, and arrogance. Crucially, they lack eidos, a deeply felt sense of shame, respect, and reverence for social and divine boundaries. Eidos is the emotional regulator that stops a person from acting on every selfish impulse. Because the suitors lack eidos, they lack the rational capacity to control their desires, and this lack of self-mastery leads directly to their annihilation. Contrast Odysseus with his great rival, Achilles. Achilles is the ultimate hero of the Iliad, and his defining characteristic is his menace, his cosmic, all-consuming rage. Achilles is ruled by his thymos. When his honor is slighted, his emotions dictate his actions, leading him to withdraw from battle and let his friends die. When his friend Patroclus is killed, his rage overrides all reason, leading him to desecrate Hector's body. Achilles is a magnificent, tragic hero, but he is a slave to his passions. Odysseus, by contrast, is the hero of the nous. He feels the rage, but he holds the leash. The philosophy of emotion in the Odyssey suggests that true human excellence requires a harmonious, integrated relationship between the rational mind and the passionate heart. It is not about eliminating emotion, which would make us less than human, robotic, and devoid of the very things that make life worth living, but about integrating it. It is about ensuring that our passions are guided by our reason, and that our reason is fueled by our passions. Odysseus's journey is, fundamentally, a journey of emotional education. He does not start out as a perfect master of himself. We see his failures early on. In Book 9, after he successfully blinds the Cyclops and escapes, his thymos, his pride and anger, gets the better of him. As he sails away, he cannot resist taunting Polyphemus, revealing his true name. This emotional indulgence is a catastrophic failure of self-regulation. It allows the Cyclops to pray to Poseidon, cursing Odysseus and dooming his crew. Later, on the island of Calypso, Odysseus is paralyzed by grief. He sits on the beach, weeping, looking out at the wine-dark sea, completely overwhelmed by his sorrow and his longing for home. In this phase, his emotions are not leading to action. They are leading to despair and passivity. But by the time he returns to Ithaca, he has learned. He has been educated by 20 years of suffering. He learns to manage his pride and his rational purpose. He learns to manage his grief, his not a porte of telity, and moving forward. And he learns to manage his rage. By the time he finally executes his revenge in the Great Hall, his emotions are perfectly aligned with his rational purpose. The slaughter of the suitors is not a wild, uncontrollable, berserker frenzy. it is a cold, calculated, and highly controlled execution of justice. He locks the doors, he secures the weapons, he fights with tactical precision, and he only stops when the threat is entirely neutralized. His Tynos provides the necessary fire and courage to act, but his nous provides the blueprint. The epic teaches us that the greatest battles are not fought against external monsters like Cyclops or Scylla. The greatest, most terrifying battles are fought against the internal chaos of our own unregulated emotions. The mastery of the self, the ability to command one's own heart, to leash the barking dog of the thymos, and to direct one's own passions toward a rational, meaningful end, is the highest achievement of the human mind. Odysseus shows us that we cannot control the storms that hit us, but through the disciplined integration of our mind and our heart, we can control how we navigate them. Section 23. The Ecology of the Odyssey. We have explored the mind, the body, the emotions, and the society of Odysseus. But we have not yet fully explored his relationship with the physical environment, the natural world, and the earth itself. The Odyssey is deeply ecological. In fact, the very word ecology comes from the Greek word oikos, meaning household, or home, and logos, meaning study. Therefore, ecology is literally the study of the household. Since the entire Odyssey is driven by Odysseus's desire to restore his oikos, it is inherently an ecological epic. It is profoundly concerned with the relationship between human beings and nature, between the wild, untamed wilderness and the cultivated, ordered landscape of the farm and the city. Through its detailed descriptions of islands, forests, farms, and gardens, the epic presents a complex philosophy of ecology, agriculture, and the human place in the natural order. In the Homeric worldview, nature is not a passive, peaceful backdrop for human action, like a pretty painting on a wall. It is an active, powerful, and often hostile force. The sea, represented by the god Poseidon, is the ultimate symbol of wild, untamed nature. It is chaotic, unpredictable, and deadly. It is the realm of the monster, the storm, and the shipwreck. To survive on the sea, human beings must use their technology, their ships, and their Metis. It is chaotic, unpredictable, and deadly. It is the realm of the monster, the storm, and the shipwreck. To survive on the sea, human beings must use their technology, their ships, and their Metis, impose a temperature and the cultivated landscape. The ideal human environment in the Odyssey is not the wild forest, nor the barren rock, but the cultivated farm, the orchard, and the garden. When Odysseus arrives on the island of the Phaeacians in Book 7, he does not first see their magnificent palaces. He sees their orchards. Homer provides a lush, detailed description of the Phaeacian gardens, where pear, pomegranate, apple, and fig trees grow in perfect abundance, bearing fruit all year round, watered by a constant spring. Notice the specific detail Homer includes. There are 2 springs. One is directed through the garden to water the crops, and the other is directed under the gateway of the courtyard to provide drinking water for the citizens. This is a profound ecological statement. It shows nature being intentionally managed for 2 purposes: agricultural fertility and civic life. This garden is a philosophical ideal. It represents the perfect harmony between human cultivation and natural fertility. It is nature tamed, ordered, and made productive by human labor and knowledge. It is not nature destroyed, but nature elevated. Similarly, when Odysseus finally returns to Ithaca in Book 24, His ultimate reunion is not in the throne room. It takes place in the orchard of his father, Laertes. Laertes is an old man, living in a humble hut at the edge of his farm, tending to his trees. He is digging around a plant, dirty, wearing rags, and worn out from his labor. This scene is a profound philosophical statement about the value of agricultural work and the connection between human identity and the land. Laertes is not a warrior. He is a farmer. But his labor on the land is presented as a noble, dignified, and deeply human activity. When Odysseus reveals his identity to his father, he doesn't just show him his scar. He names the fruit trees that Laertes gave him when he was a child, recounting exactly how many of each tree there were. The classicist William Thalman, in his book The Swineherd and the Bow, argues that the orchard acts as a living ledger of memory and genealogy. The trees are the physical manifestation of Laertes' life's work, his connection to his ancestors, and his stewardship of the earth. To know the trees is to know one's own history. This focus on agriculture reflects the fundamental economic and social reality of the ancient Greek world, which was primarily agrarian. But it also carries a deep philosophical meaning. The cultivation of the land is a metaphor for the cultivation of the self and the society. Just as the farmer must clear the wild weeds, prune the dead branches, and tend the soil to produce a good harvest, the king must clear the corruption from his household, prune the violent elements from his society, and tend the laws to produce a just community. The suitors, who consume the wealth of the household without producing anything, represent the parasitic destruction of the agricultural order. In ecological terms, they are an invasive species. Like a parasite that drains its host without giving anything back, the suitors eat Odysseus's livestock, drink his wine, and court his wife, all while contributing zero labor to the oikos. They are the weeds that must be pulled up so that the true sustainable order of the household can flourish again. The contrast between the wild and the cultivated is most starkly drawn in the episode with Cyclops in Book 9. Polyphemus lives in a wild, uncultivated landscape. He does not plant crops. He does not harvest. He does not have assemblies, which is why he violates the sacred law of hospitality. Odysseus, by contrast, is the master of the cultivated world. He is the man who builds ships, who plants olive trees, who manages flocks, and who reclaims his agricultural estate. His ultimate victory is not just the slaughter of his enemies. It is the restoration of the agricultural and domestic order of Ithaca. The French environmental philosopher Michel Serres, in his book The Natural Contract, argued that the modern ecological crisis is rooted in a philosophical view of nature as an object to be dominated, conquered, and exploited rather than a partner in a symbiotic relationship. Serres argued that just as we have a social contract with each other, we need a natural contract with the earth. The Odyssey presents an early, nuanced version of this idea. It acknowledges the hostility and the danger of the wild natural world, but it also celebrates the deep, productive, and harmonious relationship that can exist between human labor and the cultivated earth. It aligns with what the American ecologist Aldo Leopold called the land ethic, the idea that humans are not conquerors of the land community, but plain members and citizens of it. The philosophy of the Odyssey teaches us that we are not separate from nature. We are deeply embedded in it. Our survival depends on our ability to read the signs of the natural world, to respect its power, and to work with its fertility. The ultimate goal of the human journey is not to conquer the wild, but to cultivate the garden, to build a sustainable, ordered, and beautiful home on the earth, and to live in a harmonious reciprocal relationship with the land that sustains us. conclusion, the enduring legacy of the wandering mind. We have journeyed through the vast, complex, and deeply philosophical world of Odysseus. We have explored his Metis, his cunning, adaptable intelligence that allows him to navigate a hostile and unpredictable world. We have examined his epistemology of deception, his profound understanding that truth is often a tool, and that reality is shaped by language, perception, and perspective. We have delved into the existential void of autis, the philosophy of nobody. We have seen how Odysseus uses the negation of his identity to survive the monster, revealing the paradox that sometimes, to become someone of substance, you must first be willing to be no one at all. We have witnessed his tonmacine, his incredible capacity for endurance, and his ultimate ethical choice of nostos, revealing the paradox that sometimes, to become someone of substance, you must first be willing to be no one at all. We have witnessed his taimosine, his incredible capacity for endurance, and his ultimate ethical choice of nostos, revealing the paradox that sometimes, to become someone of substance, you must first be willing to be no one at all. We have witnessed his tonmacine, his incredible capacity for endurance, and his ultimate ethical choice of nostos, revealing the Dante, van Johnston, en begie de Tomiki verplemtrekt, mijn bekendheid, mijn shandy, mijn fence. We have seen how he uses masks and disguises to navigate the social world while maintaining a core identity rooted in his mind and his relationships. We have analyzed his complex relationship with the gods, balancing divine determinism with human agency and moral responsibility. We have explored his political philosophy, his role as the restorer of order and justice in Ithaca. We have investigated the sacred ethics of hospitality, the profound philosophy of time and memory, the complex dynamics of the feminine principle through Penelope and Athena, and the terrifying, humbling reality of the underworld. We have also traced his incredible legacy through the centuries. We have seen G.W.F. Hegel's vision of him as the birth of modern subjectivity and the individual. We have examined Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer's Marxist critique of him as the prototype of alienated instrumental reason, the cunning bourgeois who exploits nature and labor. We have looked at Albert Camus' existential celebration of him as the ultimate absurd hero, finding meaning in the struggle itself. We have explored Dante's tragic medieval figure of intellectual transgression and James Joyce's modernist, democratic champion of the mundane everyday. We have seen how the Stoics turned him into a rational sage and how the psychoanalyst Carl Jung viewed his journey as the ultimate map of psychological individuation. But the legacy doesn't stop there. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche viewed Odysseus as the ultimate master of self-overcoming, a man who creates his own values in a chaotic world. In the post-colonial context, the Nobel laureate poet Derek Walcott reimagined Odysseus in his epic Omeros, transplanting the hero to the Caribbean to explore the legacy of empire and the resilience of marginalized voices. And the author, Margaret Atwood, in the Penelopead, gave voice to Penelope and the murdered maids, challenging the traditional patriarchal narrative and reminding us that the myth of Odysseus must continually be questioned and re-evaluated. Through all of this, one thing becomes abundantly clear. Odysseus is not just a character in an ancient myth. He is a philosophical archetype. He is the embodiment of the human mind in its struggle to understand itself, to navigate a chaotic universe, and to create meaning in the face of suffering and mortality. The philosophy of Odysseus is not a set of rigid rules or abstract ivory tower theories. It is a practical, lived philosophy. It is a philosophy of survival, of adaptation, of endurance, and of connection. It is a philosophy that recognizes the darkness and the cruelty of the world, but that stubbornly refuses to surrender to it. It is a philosophy that values the mind over brute force, that prioritizes the home over the battlefield, and that insists on the dignity and the agency of the individual, even in the face of overwhelming, seemingly insurmountable odds. In many ways, Odysseus's ability to reframe his suffering, to control his impulses, and to focus on his long-term goals is the ancient equivalent of modern cognitive behavioral therapy and psychological resilience training. Odysseus teaches us that we are not defined by our circumstances, but by how we respond to them. He teaches us that intelligence, flexibility, and endurance are our greatest weapons against the chaos of the universe. He teaches us that truth is complex, that identity is fluid, and that meaning is not something we find. It is something we must constantly fight to create and maintain. And above all, he teaches us the profound importance of home. Not just a physical place with a roof and walls, but a state of mind, a network of relationships, a foundation of identity and meaning. In our modern world, a world characterized by digital nomadism, climate migration, global displacement, and profound social alienation, the ancient concept of nostos is more urgent than ever. He teaches us that no matter how far we wander, no matter how much we suffer, no matter how many masks we wear to survive the corporate or social world, the ultimate goal is to return to ourselves, to our roots, and to the people we love. The Odyssey is not just a story of the past, it is a mirror for the present. In a world that is increasingly chaotic, increasingly polarized, and increasingly dominated by the cold, unfeeling logic of algorithms and instrumental reason, the philosophy of Odysseus is more relevant than ever. We are all, in our own ways, wandering the wine-dark sea. We are all facing our own cyclopes, our own sirens, alluring Prosit our own Pisa to social media and consumerism, and our own suitors in Playfright that try to consume our resources and our peace of mind. We are all trying to find our way home. Odysseus shows us that the journey is hard, that the suffering is real, and that the outcome is never guaranteed. He wept, he despaired, and he nearly gave up. But he also shows us that the human mind is capable of incredible resilience, that the human spirit is capable of enduring unimaginable hardship, and that the human capacity for love, for connection, and for meaning is stronger than any monster, any god, or any storm. So, the next time you find yourself facing an impossible obstacle, the next time you feel lost, alienated, or overwhelmed by the chaos of the world, remember the man who sat on the beach and chose mortality over immortality. Remember the man who named himself nobody to survive the monster. Remember the man who endured 20 years of suffering, who fought gods and monsters, just to sit at his own table with his own wife and watch the smoke rising from his own island. Remember Odysseus. And remember that the greatest adventure is not the conquest of the world, but the journey back to yourself. If this deep dive into the philosophy of Odysseus has changed the way you see the ancient world, or if it has given you a new perspective on your own journey, please hit the like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows us to keep exploring these mind-bending topics. And if you want to join us for more deep dives into history, philosophy, and the human condition, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We have a lot more ground to cover, and I would love to have you along for the ride. Until next time, keep thinking, keep questioning, and keep sailing toward your own Ithaca.